And what's up, everybody? Welcome into the Lone Gunman Podcast. This is episode number 386. I got a special guest here tonight. Mr. Bill Brown is with me. Hey, Bill, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Fantastic. We had a couple audio issues at the beginning. We were a little late, but the main thing is it's working now, and we're here. And a couple weeks ago, I had Matt Douthit on the show, and I know you guys. He's like your nemesis in the Tippit thing, right?
I like Matt because I appreciate his passion for the Tippit case, which is rare. However, I wouldn't call him my nemesis.
I know. I'm exaggerating. He was a little worried about me having you on, and I was like, it's not going to be that kind of show. I got, for those who don't know, I think you believe in the official story conclusion that Oswald, I don't want to be a little nutter, but
So let me say this.
Yeah.
My name is Bill Brown, and I am an expert in the murder of Dallas Patrolman Tippit Oswald, and you can be beat.
If you just read this book, right?
That's right.
I hear you. And we'll get into all that, but I first want to, because I've had Fred Litwin on the show, Steve Rowe,
Okay.
Scott Maudsley. I'm friends with a lot of you guys, and I like having those guys on because you can have a conversation with them. We're not here to bang heads and yell at each other. And
not at all.
I hate these debates things because they never go anywhere, and you're not going to change anybody's minds and yada yada yada. But I do like to have a conversation, and that's what I'm hoping we can have here tonight.
Right.
So first, just give everybody a little bit of background on you and how you got interested in the case.
Okay.
And what led you down the path that you're on now and to the conclusions that you do have now?
Well, it was in high school. It was my junior year in high school, and I was in study hall. And we got to go to the library. I was in the true crime section or the history way, but I accidentally came across the day Kennedy was shot. And I started. I looked up right there in the aisle of the library. I started reading through it. It was gripping. It pulled me in, and I checked out the book and started reading it in class. Instead of paying attention to my classwork, I'm reading Jim Bishop's "The Day Kennedy Was Shot." Did we lose the audio?
No,
we're still here.
Somebody said we had a little echo.
Yeah, I had an echo, but I was going to let it go. But that's good that it's gone, so it's good now.
Yeah, I think I fixed it.
Okay. So I was reading The Day Kennedy Was Shot by Jim Bishop, got pulled in, and then after that, I just couldn't get my hands on enough, reading On the Trail of the Assassins, Jim Marr's Crossfire. So that's how I got hooked. And then it was back in 2008 when I joined my first internet forum regarding discussing and debating the Kennedy assassination. And after about 2 years or so, I kind of got pulled into, I found myself discussing and being more interested in what happened in Oak Cliff more so than, what happened in Dealey Plaza. Not that I wasn't interested in the Kennedy assassination, because I am, but I've gravitated towards the Tippit shooting and the capture of Oswald. For whatever reason, I found that more interesting. And, you play the games where, hey, if you could time travel back to November 22nd, 1963, where would you go? And a lot of people say, I would go behind the fence, or I would be up in the sniper's nest. I would be at 10th and Patton. I'd want to know what the conversation was between Tippit and, in my opinion, Oswald. I could say Tippit and his killer, but what made Tippit get out of the car? What made Tippit even pull over in the first place? I want to know those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know just from talking to you in the past couple of weeks, you just recently got back. I mean, you like to take a lot of trips to Dallas and even New Orleans, and you were just in New Orleans, right?
Right. Yeah, I went down with 5 other buddies, and we spent 4.5 days down in New Orleans. We were chasing Oswald around New Orleans. Yeah, going to all the Oswald sites. And thanks to you furnished me with the address of Guy Bannister's office and Jack Martin's. Not Guy Bannister's office, but his residence. and also Jack Martin residence. So yeah, we went to places like the International Trade Mart where Oswald was captured in the black and white film footage, passing out the leaflets. We went to that corner right there, and you're able to line up the background, which those buildings across the street in the background are still there today. So it's kind of neat to be able to know that Lee Oswald stood right here where I'm standing, passing out leaflets. We were kind of nerding out like that for 4.5 days.
Yeah, because all that stuff's kind of right close together there.
Oh
With the
yeah,
Trade Mart and Canal Street, and
yep,
where Bernier's shop was, and
yeah,
the Montana
yep.
Bar.
The little incident with Carlos Brunier, and then we went to the Riley Coffee Company, and we even did the small things like the print shop, which is right across the street from Riley Coffee, where Oswald had his leaflets printed up. We pretty much covered it all. The house on Magazine Street, the Napoleon Branch Library, all that stuff.
Yeah, so his house on Magazine Street, that's kind of like a hike away from all the.
Yeah, it was a little. It was a little bit. I'm sure he had to take a bus. I think it was. I think I actually measured it. It was like 8/10 of a mile to 9/10 of a mile from, the sites. Like 544 Camp Street and Riley Coffee and all those places.
Well, we know he took a bus, right? Judy Baker told us that
Sure.
he
Well,
took
yeah. Well, that makes it a
a bus. Oh Lord, at least we have something in common, right?
fact.
Uh, so let's see here. So getting back, and just from we're friends on Facebook, and I see you post stuff all the time, and you've met some very interesting characters involved with the case. Like Ruth Payne, Bill Frazier, James
Yep.
Lavelle.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about meeting some of these people in real life, and how that is.
Okay. Well, we'll start with Jim Lavelle. So this would have been the summer of 2019. So it was about 3 months before he passed away. I was in Dallas. There was a group of us. I think there was about 8 or 10 of us down there this particular time. But myself and Frank Battleson and Dave Ledbetter, we got there a day earlier than everybody else, and we went to visit Jim Lavelle because Dave Ledbetter knew Jim Lavelle, knew him for like 20 years, maybe even longer than that. And we brought him a barbecue sandwich, and we were in his living room from 5:30 till almost midnight. So it was over 6 hours, and we spent the first hour talking about the assassination, and then we spent the next 5 hours talking about his career and the cases that he had seen and worked over his career. He seemed more thrilled to talk about his career more so than just the Kennedy assassination. But yeah, we were in there for about 6 hours, and then Frank Battleson bought the station wagon that Ruth Payne gave driving lessons to Lee Harvey Oswald in, and he bought that station wagon. I think the station wagon was put up for auction, and somehow or another Frank ended up buying it. And through buying that station wagon, he was put in contact with Ruth Payne, and so he actually developed a relationship with Ruth. And then The Truth Is the Only Client came out in September of 2019, and the maker of the film, Todd Quaid, he paid for Ruth to fly to Dallas because she was living in Santa Rosa, California, about an hour north of San Francisco. So he flew her to Dallas, and Frank and I and Dave Ledbetter and another fella, Ed Murray, we were Ruth's transportation for those 4.5 days that she was in Dallas. So I got to ride around in a minivan for 4 days with Ruth Payne, and that was pretty surreal. And then yeah, and then in November of 23 for the 60th anniversary, the museum, the Irving Library, they because Ruth was given a speech with Thomas Mallon, who wrote Mrs. Payne's Garage. So once again, they paid for Ruth to fly in and put up at a hotel. So we stayed at the same hotel, and Ruth told the people from the library that, hey, if I come in, I want these guys to be my transportation. So that was pretty cool that she was asking for us, and so we drove her around for 4 more days, and that was during the anniversary back in 2023, and then yeah, so I was in November. I'm sorry, I was in Dallas last November, and I was able through Dave Perry, who I've known and talked to for a few years now. I was able to secure a dinner over pizza with Frank Battleson, Dave Perry, and Bill Frazier. So for 2 hours, I got to have pizza with Bill Frazier. Yeah, so
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
pretty. I've also met and talked to Bob Jackson for a couple hours one on one. And for those who don't know, Bob Jackson was in the motorcade in one of the press cars, and also he took the famous photo of Ruby shooting Oswald, which he won the Pulitzer Prize for that. So I was able to spend one on one with him for a couple hours. That was back in 2008 for the 45th anniversary.
Yeah, I was.
I've been lucky with that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. I had Paul Abbott on the show. He wrote a book about the Oswald shooting in the
Right,
basement with Ruby,
right,
and and we were talking and researching for the show. I was reading that Jack Beers, he had missed getting that photo by like
Right. Yeah.
milliseconds, and it
And,
haunted him for the rest of his
oh
life.
yeah.
Until he
Yeah.
died, you know.
And you got to think they were so close, like you just said, milliseconds, and they weren't allowed to leave the basement for a while. And these weren't digital cameras. They didn't know exactly what they captured on film. So they both had to wait for almost 2 hours before they could even go back to their respective papers to see exactly what they caught on film. And I'm sure when Beers developed his photo, he probably was ecstatic and think, I just won the Pulitzer. And then all of a sudden Jackson's like, nope, I did.
Yeah, yeah, man, that would haunt me too.
By
But
the way, one of the things you mentioned Paul Abbott. One of the things we're going to talk about in the next hour, hour and a half, however long we're going to do this, and I have all night, so it's not, but one of the things we're going to discuss is the fact that Matt Douthit likes to call me out for my time trial that I did with Matt. Well, Paul Abbott was with us. It was me, Matt Douthit, and Paul Abbott. We were doing the time trials.
oh, really? Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
cool, cool. Yeah, he sent me some things about the time trials, some numbers, but we'll get there. We'll get
Yeah.
there. So I did a show a couple weeks ago, and we were kind of looking into some things, and I try to look at things differently and try to come at things a little bit differently sometimes, and just rehashing the same old,
Mhm.
the same old, same old. And we heard, part of the lore for so long has been that, well, Tippit was sitting at the Gloco station for 10 minutes, and so and so and so and so saw him. Tippit went to the top 10 record store and did this and did that, and he pulled this guy over, and he did that and he did that. So in kind of looking for some kind of documentary evidence that these events actually took place, instead of just firsthand eyewitness accounts, if you will.
Well, some of these people when they interviewed at the Gloco station, for example, they didn't even talk about seeing Tippit. This was a year and a half, 2 years later. They don't even talk about seeing Tippit. They talked about Jack Ruby used to come in here, and get gas, things like that. So why didn't they mention Tippit? This is a year. I'm not saying the Gloco thing did not. I'm not saying Tippit wasn't sitting at the Gloco, but why did they tell the story right away? Why did they wait a couple years to tell that story? So it's kind of
Yeah, I
hard to
traced it
reconcile.
back to this little book that Ramparts put out, is where it first appeared
Mhm.
in 1967. That was the story, right?
Right.
So I went back and tried to find some documents, and I found the one you're talking about from
Mhm.
Shorty, JB Shorty
Right.
Lewis,
Lewis. Yeah.
and it was dated from January '64. It wasn't a year after.
Okay. So when he first mentioned Tippit,
Now, he didn't mention Tippit at all.
that's my point. Yeah.
Yeah,
So my point is, so right away when I said a couple years later, I didn't mean originally. What I'm saying is when he was interviewed originally, which is what you're talking about, January '64, he doesn't mention
yeah,
Tippit. Why not? Why
right,
not mention Tippit at that time? My point was he
exactly,
doesn't mention Tippit until a couple years later. That's what I was getting at.
right. Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with it.
Right.
That doesn't make sense. And
Right.
and uh, he mentions in that document, the FBI document, when they talk to him, and the one we're talking about here, where he doesn't mention Tippit. He mentions one of the other guys that's always been involved in the story, but not the other one. Um,
Of course.
and there's two other people, the Volkmans,
Right.
right? They're a married couple, and he took a picture on the other side of the underpass.
Correct.
And when I was talking to Matt, I was like, if you're driving by, going 30, 40 miles an hour, and you look over and you see a cop car at a gas station, how are you really seeing, what the number on the car is and who's sitting in it?
And why are you really paying attention to that?
Yeah, how sure can you be that that's JD
Right.
Tippit? I
Sure.
mean, so that was always odd to me.
The thing about the Gloco sighting, though, it doesn't regarding Oswald's guilt or lack of it, whether no matter which side you sit on, I don't really think that changes anything one way or the other.
Right. Yeah. So when you take these three instances, so the Gloco station, the Andrews thing, um, and the
Speaking of
top
the
10
Andrews thing, I
record,
was going to say, not to interrupt you, I'm sorry, but real quick, while I was thinking of it, we're talking about how would you know that was Tippit? Why would you pay attention to that Tippit was the officer sitting in? So the William Andrews story, the guy pulls over, the cop gets out and runs back, and he says he notices the nameplate and it says Tippit. I mean, come on, You got
Right.
a police officer running up to you and looking in your back. The last thing you're looking at is his nameplate, which, by the way, is like a quarter-inch high and 2 inches long.
Well, and the other half of his story is Roscoe White, which doesn't help.
No,
Doesn't
uh,
help what he's trying to say either.
not even talking about Roscoe White. So,
I know, I know. So I'm
so
thinking, okay, well, what if these things that we think that are part of the lore, the top 10 record store thing, what if none of these ever happened? Because the top
yeah,
10 is another thing
1981. You
that we
don't
don't
hear
have.
about that until 81. So
Well,
let me ask you.
there is a
Yeah,
document that came out
right.
December 13th, but it wasn't from anybody that worked there. It was he was relaying a rumor. He didn't want his identity given out, and he was given the rumor that Oswald had been in the store
Mhm.
in the morning buying a ticket to the Dick
Right,
Clark thing, and then he came
right,
back in and Tippit and him were there at the same time.
right. And,
But
and
it was just a
maybe
rumor.
something as simple as that is what sparked Dub Stark and Luis Cortines in 1981 to tell this story, perhaps. Here's the thing: Stark and Cortines waited until 1981 to tell this magnificent story of
Right.
Tippit rushing in, going past everybody, getting on the phone, dialing a number, waiting for an amount of time long enough to hear 7 or 8 rings, gets no answer, hangs up, and runs back out and speeds off. Here's the thing, though: in an area the size of Oak Cliff, by 1981, 64 to 80, I would be willing to bet you that J.D. Tippett's name is more legendary than that of John Kennedy. Just if we're talking about just an Oak Cliff. And why would they wait 18 years or 17 years to tell this magnificent story? It doesn't make sense. Um,
No.
and if you're okay with it, Rob, what I'd like to do, and we can go whatever direction you want, but what I would like to do is a couple of things. One, I'd like to show that Oswald could get to 10th and Patton in time to shoot Tippit around 1:15, 1:16. And I would also like to discuss the witnesses that
Absolutely.
actually, okay, where they were and what they said they saw, whether they felt like it was Oswald or not. And the third thing is the evidence against Oswald. Uh, those are probably the big three that I would like to discuss here tonight.
Yeah, because like I was telling you about these things with Tippit, does it matter if they actually happened or not? Because this is pre. I mean, it'd be nice to know Tippit's actual movements, and we do have the Dallas police logs, but there's problems with those. Um, so I don't know how much we can trust them or how much they're open to interpretation. Let's say at
Mhm.
least the ones that I've heard.
Well, I can
There's
tell you,
two or three different versions of the police logs that have been put out.
I've listened to the actual tapes in real time from 12:30 to
Yeah,
1:50 when Oswald 1:50 is when Oswald was arrested, and at 1:50 1:51 is when Gerald Hill gets on the police radio and says, we got the suspect, we're heading uptown. I listened to him in real time for an hour and 20 minutes, and there's when you do that, there's nothing suspicious. They were releasing different versions because they weren't exactly clear what the Warren Commission was looking for, and they were just being more precise with each. From one release to the next, they were being more precise. I don't think there's a problem with the police tapes, um, and I'll tell you. So
well, it's kind of hard
basic,
to understand what he's saying. I mean, I don't
well,
know.
so as far as getting Oswald to 10th and Patton in time, okay.
Yeah,
The Secret Service and the FBI, they reconstructed Oswald's steps with the help of Cecil McWaters and William Whaley, and David Bellin was in on this as well. And they were trying to determine the absolute earliest, and this is the important part. They were trying to determine the absolute earliest that Oswald could have reached the rooming house. Okay, and now this isn't 10th and Patton. This is just reaching the rooming house. And based on McWater's statement of where it was that Oswald boarded the bus, and we know Oswald boarded the bus because he had McWater's very specific bus transfer on him, and McWaters said he issued the transfer to only one woman and only one man. Oswald walked about 7 blocks east. This is after he leaves the depository, and McWater says, "So I gave him so I gave her a transfer." Talking about the lady, I gave her a transfer and opened the door, and she was going out, and the gentleman I picked up about 2 blocks back asked for a transfer and got off at the same place in the middle of the block where the lady did. It was the intersection near Lamar Street. It was near Poydras and Lamar, and that's what Cecil McWaters testified to. So they concluded, based on what McWaters told them, along with the Secret Service agents and the FBI agents actually walking and timing the route, it was an average of 6.5 minutes for them to walk from the front steps of the depository to that point where Oswald got on McWaters' bus. And so therefore, we have Oswald boarding the bus around 12:40. Now, this is based on Oswald leaving the front steps of the depository at 12:33. Okay, And after being on the bus for no more than so McWaters said that he was on the bus for about 4 or 5 minutes. That's how he worded it. So how long do you accept that Oswald was on the bus? But if we're trying to see the absolute earliest Oswald could have reached the boarding house, we're going to say 4 minutes. So Oswald gets off the bus at
He
Lamar
got
and Elm
out
Street.
of the depository at 12:33
Yes,
within 2 minutes of the shooting.
three.
Okay, so the
Yeah,
shooting.
he's encountered in the lunchroom by Baker right about 90 seconds after the assassination, and the Warren Commission determined that he went out the front door around 12:33.
Okay, well, that seems
So,
awful
so
quick. But okay,
okay, so I mean, if he go okay, so we'll say if he goes out the front door at 12:33, then he's getting on the McWaters bus at 12:40, and McWaters has him on the bus for 4 or 5 minutes. So right now we're going to call it 4 minutes, only because I'm trying to see if it's possible for Oswald to have gotten to 10th and Patton in time. So we have Oswald leaving the bus around 12:44. Oswald then walks the 3 to 4 short blocks over to the Greyhound station where he boarded Whaley's cab. And this has Oswald entering the cab at 12:48. It was a 4 minute walk.
okay,
They then, with Whaley, they reconstructed the cab ride from the Greyhound, and we know where it was that Oswald boarded Whaley's cab out in front of the Greyhound station. And he drove to the intersection of Beckley and Neely. Whaley stated that he dropped Oswald off at Beckley and Neely. Oswald got out of the cab just north of the intersection. He crosses the street. They concluded using a stopwatch that the cab ride took 5 minutes and 30 seconds. So we have Oswald exiting Whaley's cab between 12:53 and 12:54. Okay. And then, still using a stopwatch, they concluded that it was a 5 minute and 45 second walk from the point Oswald exited the cab to the rooming house.
now
So,
how does this correlate to what you guys did in
and
Dallas in your time trial?
okay, and I'll read that. I'll read that to you next because I wrote down my time trial results.
Okay,
So I think Oswald gets to the rooming house 12:59, and Earlene Roberts testified. Now she gave many descriptions of how long Oswald was back there in his room. A few minutes, not more than 3 or 4 minutes, or things like that. But those are all figure of speech. But one thing that she said, Rob, that was not a figure of speech was she said that he was back in his room just long enough to grab a jacket and put it on. So how long does it take you? And have you've been inside the rooming house, right?
no, I didn't. I've never
Okay, I'm
been.
sorry. All right. So
I
it's a
went
very
there when
tiny
they were
room.
doing.
It's
Yeah.
almost like it was a big closet at one time. It's a very small room. She said that Oswald was back in his room just long enough to grab a jacket and put it on. So, in my opinion, and this is only my opinion, and I could be wrong, but my opinion is Oswald's back in that room for not more than a minute because it doesn't take more than a minute to grab his jacket. And of course, he grabbed his revolver and the bullets.
Well,
So I have
let
Oswald
me ask you a question.
arriving
Okay.
around
Let me ask you a
12.
question real quick.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the shirt that Oswald is arrested in, okay,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
ugly brown.
The brown arrest shirt. That's what I call it. Yeah.
Nobody puts him in that shirt at work that day. So, and he also said, I believe, to Fritz that he changed clothes when he went back to the rooming house.
Yeah.
And they did find some dirty clothes, dirty trousers, and another shirt, freshly worn. So if he did change his clothes and at least changed his trousers, maybe kept his T-shirt on, added a shirt, then a jacket, got his gun, that adds a little bit of time.
But let me ask you. So let's use some logic here.
Okay.
Uh, why would he go in and change his clothes? Why is he going to go in and change clothes? But what's the reason for that? Can you explain why he would be in the back there in his room
Maybe they
changing
were
clothes?
dusty and dirty, and he was a little dainty boy and did
So
not
he
like.
wanted to wear clean clothes to the movie theater.
Or yeah, maybe, I don't know.
Okay. Okay. I don't believe he changed clothes. I believe he just went back there and grabbed a jacket. Now here's the thing. So I mean, you know who Mary Bledsoe is, right? His previous landlord.
Yeah, yeah.
So so you said that other Oswald's co-workers never put Oswald wearing the shirt that day. See, I don't really know anything about that. I've never heard that before. But what I do know is that Mary Bledsoe was a former landlady of Oswald, of the apartment that he rented on Marsalis before he ended up moving over to Beckley. She was on the bus that McWaters was driving, and she said that Oswald was on the bus, and she noticed, she recognized him because he rented a room from her previously, and she noticed the sleeve, one of the sleeves had a hole in the elbow, and that brown arrest shirt does have a hole in the elbow. So, you know, you can do with that information what you want, but Mary Bledsoe says she saw Oswald on the bus, and she said that the shirt that he was wearing had a hole in the elbow. The brown arrest shirt does have a hole in the elbow. So, you know, you can do with that information what you want, but Mary Bledsoe says she saw Oswald on the bus, and she said that the shirt that he was wearing had a hole in the elbow. The brown arrest shirt does have a hole in the elbow. So, you know, you can do with that information what you want, but Mary Bledsoe says she saw Oswald on the bus, and she said that the shirt that he was wearing had a hole in the elbow.
and which may have not been put there until he was arrested at the Texas Theater. Roughed up a little bit and
Yeah, who
talked.
knows? Yeah, who knows when the hole was there? But I'm just telling you what Mary Bledsoe testified to.
Yeah, yeah, I know. All
So
right.
in my opinion, okay, I think Oswald gets to the rooming house 12:59. He's back there for 1 minute. He goes back out the door. A minute later, he's standing at the bus stop. You know, by Earlene Roberts said she looked out there moments later. Now, what does that mean? So Matt Douthit likes to act like moments means 4 minutes later she looks out there, and Oswald comes in at 103 and he's back there for a few minutes to 106, and then she looks out the door moments later. So he's out there like a one. Matt Douthit literally has, and I don't want to make this about Matt, but he literally has Oswald standing at the bus stop as late as 108 or 109. And whereas I believe that Oswald arrives at 12:59, he's in his room for a minute, he's standing at the bus stop for a minute. By 101, I think he starts walking south on Beckley.
So also just to back up a little bit, Erling Roberts says that she saw a cop car pull up, honk its horn twice, and she got up and looked out the window. And this supposedly happened while Oswald is in his room changing, correct?
Yeah,
Okay. And not after he's away from the bus stop.
correct. According to Earlene Roberts, it was while Oswald was back in the room. But then again, so let's go. Let's get back to that at a later time. Right now, I'm just trying to do the timeline.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, yeah.
trying to show you how I feel like Oswald gets to 10th and Patton by 115, 116. Okay. So to recap, with the Secret Service, the FBI, David Bellin, they used stopwatches. Cecil McWaters, William Whaley. Uh, Oswald basically arrives at the rooming house at 12:59. I feel like he's back there for a minute because I also feel like he's back there just long enough to grab a jacket and go back out the door. I talked on the phone with Darwin Payne of the Dallas Times Herald. I talked to him about 2 months ago, and he was actually in the rooming house that afternoon after the police left, and he was able to talk to Earlene Roberts. And the reason I wanted to talk to him was because I wanted to know what Earlene may have said to him regarding how long Oswald was back there in the room. And when I was talking to Mr. Payne, he didn't give any number like as far as he was back there for 2 minutes. She said he was back there for 3 minutes. He was back there for 1 minute. She never used a number. What she told him was that he was in and out real quick.
Yeah.
So, what does that mean? Is he back there changing clothes? Is he back there for 3 or 4 minutes? Or is he back there just long enough to grab a jacket? Which is what I believe. So my point is he arrives at 12:59, stays back there for a minute. He walks out the door at 1. She actually even said that that he rushed in. So we know he's not just walking lackadaisical. And she said, "You sure are in a hurry." Then she looks out the window. He's at the bus stop. You know, if he's basically standing at the bus stop, it's near that busy intersection of Beckley and Zhang, and you know, by this time it's 30 minutes after the assassination. He doesn't know is his face on the news, is his name all over the place. It's not. We know this now, but he doesn't know what's going on. So he decides, what's pretty. This is just me hypothesizing. I admit this is speculating. So he's thinking, it's crazy for me to stand out here in this busy intersection. Let me. So he starts walking south on Beckley. Uh, now, there was a special called Unsolved History with Gary Mack and Dave Perry, and they had an Oswald double walking the various routes from the rooming house to 10th and Patton. And the most direct route, they had their Oswald double reached 10th and Patton in 11 minutes, and I think it was 11 minutes and 15 seconds, 11 minutes and 20 seconds. Right, it was 11:20 or 11:10, right in that window right there. So point being, so if I have Oswald leaving the bus stop at 101, and it's only at 11 or 12, it's 11 minutes and 20 seconds to get to 10th and Patton, then Oswald's at 10th and Patton as early as 112. And you asked me a minute ago how that coincides with my time trials that I did. So while I was in Dallas last November, and along with Matt Douthit and Paul Abbott, we performed time trials from the front steps of the depository all the way to 10th and Patton, except Matt didn't walk. Matt didn't walk. So that's another thing. So Matt's real critical of my time trials. He criticizes me for not including the 8 or 10 seconds that Oswald offered the cab to the lady, in front of the Greyhound. You know, he criticizes me for not counting the 10 seconds that Oswald would have had to pay when he got on McWater's bus. It's a bunch of nonsense that yet he's criticizing these 8 seconds here and 10 seconds there. Yet,
He wanted to stop it at red lights too.
well, I'll get to that. Yeah. So Matt criticizes me for not counting 8 seconds to allow, to offer the cab to the lady. 8 or 10 seconds for not putting change through the little slot there when he got on the bus. And yet he wants to accept Cecil McWaters that Oswald was on the bus for 4 minutes. What if Oswald was on the bus for 3.5 minutes? What if it was 4.5 minutes or 5 minutes? So my point is, it's foolish for anyone to try to break this down into split seconds. It's not possible. Okay, all we can do is say that Oswald could have got there by 112. So regarding what you just now said about stopping, so let me get to that. So with Paul Abbott and Matt Douthit, we drove from we first of all we walked from the front steps of the depository east on Elm Street to the spot where Oswald got on the bus. Me, Paul, and Matt, and it took us 6 minutes and 55 seconds. All right. So if we allow for 4 minutes on the bus, which just going by what McWater said, and keep in mind, we're trying to determine the earliest possible time Oswald could have got to 10th and Patton. So we're not going to use the 5 minutes because McWater said 4 or 5 minutes. We're going to use the 4 minutes. And I'm doing this for a reason. And then from the point that Oswald got off the bus, we walked over to the Greyhound station where Whaley's cab was parked, and we know exactly where it was parked. And that took 3 minutes and 26 seconds. And I'm doing this with two conspiracy advocates, keep in mind. And then we drove from that spot. We actually had to walk back to Dealey Plaza to get our cars and drove back up to the Greyhound. So we started from that spot. We drove to the intersection of Beckley and Neely where Oswald got out of the cab. It took us 4 minutes and 53 seconds. Now, here's the thing. I take offense to something Matt said when he was describing this on your podcast a few weeks ago. I did stop the stopwatch at the red lights. I think there was 3 red lights, and I stopped. I paused the stopwatch at those 3 red lights because, again, and this is important, I'm trying to determine the earliest Oswald could have got to 10th and Patton just to see if it was possible.
So
because
hypothetically, if the cab caught every green light on the way,
that's my point. And I'm admitting that,
yeah,
like I said, I'm just trying to see the earliest he could have got there. All right.
right.
I'm not, whenever I reach my conclusion at the end, I'm not demanding that Oswald got there at blah, blah, blah time. I'm just trying to see what the earliest was he could have got there.
Right,
so when you're doing that, you're going to stop, you're going to pause the stopwatch at the 3 red lights. Now, Matt said something about I paused the stopwatch at stop signs. Well, okay, so that's bullshit. We didn't come to any stop signs. We didn't stop the stopwatch at stop signs. And he said that to you, so that didn't happen. But we did come to 3 red lights where I paused the stopwatch. And then we got out of the cab. And with Paul Abbott, because Matt Douthit didn't walk it, by the way, with Paul Abbott, we walked from Beckley and Neely back up to the front door of the rooming house, and that took 5 minutes and 54 seconds. Okay. Let's just allow, just for argument's purposes right now, Oswald's back in the room for 1 minute because, again, according to Earlene Roberts, just long enough, I guess, to grab a jacket and put it on. That's a direct quote from Earlene Roberts. And then we allow him to stand at the bus stop for 1 minute. And then from the bus stop outside the rooming house, I walked it myself personally. It took 12 minutes and 20 seconds. Keep in mind, Gary Mack and Dave Perry on the Unsolved History special, they have their Oswald double. He does it a full minute quicker than me, but I was 50 years old. So the total time for me was 39 minutes and 28 seconds, but we're not counting the 8 seconds that he has to drop change in the slot. We're not counting the 7, 8 seconds, 10 seconds that he's got to offer the cab to the lady. I think all that stuff is kind of silly, and I really don't know what Matt's trying to get at when he wants to argue about little things like that, because they are insignificant. So here's the thing, Rob. If I leave the front steps of the depository at 12:33, then I am at the patrol car. I'm at the I'm not saying the shooting took place this early. I'm just saying if I leave the depository at 12:33 and I don't and I pause the stopwatch at the 3 red lights, I reach 10th and Patton between 112 and 113, and I'm only trying to. So I'm not saying the shooting took place at 112, 113. I'm simply saying that it was possible to get there.
That's the earliest he could have possibly gotten there.
In my opinion, 112 to 113 is when I got there. But I'll tell you what, if we're going to allow for the Gary Mack, Dave Perry, Oswald double instead of me, I walked it at 12:20. He walked it at 11:20. So their Oswald gets there between 111 and 112. But I get there between 112 and 113 because their Oswald double obviously walked it faster than I did. Okay. And Oswald probably would have been walking faster than me. He's 140-pound Marine, 24 years old. He's going to walk it faster than me. So there's no problem with whether or not Oswald was able to get to the Tippit shooting in time. And that's all I'm trying to say regarding that.
So hypothetically, all the stars align, everything goes right as quickly as possible. He could have been there by 112, 113 at the earliest.
Yeah, 112, like 112:28, something like that. I think it was 112:28 with what I did.
Okay.
And if the shooting isn't until 115 to 116, then we still have 3 minutes to play around with. And that's my whole point. I'm not saying the shooting took place at 112. I'm just saying you can get there by 112.
And he may not have gotten there by 112. He may have
Correct.
gotten there 114, 115.
Correct.
And things happen, right?
I mean, it's possible. And, and
When
then you have,
two, of something going on either way. Maybe Earlene was maybe he was in the room for 2 minutes instead of one.
Yeah. I mean, maybe he was in there for 40 seconds. Maybe he was in there for 2 minutes. There's no way to know. So
she's another one too. I don't know. It's hard to trust what she says because she's saying that the FBI and the police show up at the rooming house at 1:30.
Right? I think she's baddest. I mean, they didn't even arrest Oswald till 1:50 at the Texas Theater.
Right. I said, I'm something. Okay, well, if the cops are at the rooming house by 1:30, something's definitely going on here because they shouldn't have any idea where he lives.
I'd be willing to bet you Earlene Roberts is one of those ladies where if you put a blindfold on her and tell her not to talk for 5 minutes and then you take it off, she wouldn't have been able to tell you how long she had it on. Was it 2 minutes or was it 12 minutes? Some people just don't know those things. So
mentally, how these people were put together back then. I mean, we've seen the interview with her, and you can kind of gauge a little bit from that. And
well, she was fired, for making up stories. Gladys Johnson said that she was prone to making up stories. It was one of the issues that she always had with Earlene Roberts. So, and also one more thing, and then we'll talk about the witnesses if we're done with the timeline. And I can still talk timeline if you want to, but Earlene Roberts was besieged by the world's press on the afternoon of the assassination. She makes no mention whatsoever of a police car. She mentions nothing to no one. As a matter of fact, one thing she did say, though, is that Oswald walked out zipping up a jacket as he went out the door. A short gray coat is what she told a reporter on a radio interview that afternoon. My point is, though, why didn't she tell everybody about this? She said a short gray coat is what she said.
She said a dark jacket as well.
Well, what she told the reporter on November 22nd, 1963, was he left the room going out the front door, zipping it up as he went out. Right. It was a short gray coat.
Secret Service report or something. She said a dark colored jacket. But
so
semantics,
Yeah, but let me ask you: Are you by bringing that up? Are you saying that you're not sure he left in a jacket, or?
Well, I'm just saying the one they found is like a really light gray, almost white
gray,
colored jacket, which is different. I wouldn't call that a dark colored jacket.
She said she had, when they showed her the jacket in her testimony, she says she thought that the jacket he left in was a little darker than the one they were showing her. Warren Commission Exhibit 162 is the jacket in evidence. So, point being, she said he left. Let's call it a rainbow colored jacket for all I care. She said he left in a jacket and he was zipping it up as he went out the door. And this will matter later. I'll save this one for later. So, but she told a reporter on that afternoon that he left in a short gray coat. Okay. But my point about the police car with Earlene Roberts, she's besieged by the world's press that afternoon, doesn't say a word about this police car. And now on Sunday, 2 days later, Jack Ruby shoots Lee Harvey Oswald, which undoubtedly sparked tons of conspiracy theories, right? The accused assassin is gunned down in the basement of the police station. That's very suspicious. Naturally, conspiracy theories are going to fly. And then all of a sudden, a few days after that, now Earlene Roberts tells a story about a police car pulling up. It's important to note the timing of when she told this police car story, and it wasn't during that weekend. So let's just, do with that information what you want, but at least know that, at least be aware of that. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole nother rabbit hole.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
With the number of the car and how many people are in it and who, yeah.
Yeah. So, and by the way, if they're going to, what was the purpose of this what were they supposed to pick him up? Well, if that's the case, why didn't they? Again, we got to use logic and common sense. If this horn honking incident happened, then why did they pull up and honk and leave? That makes no sense whatsoever. So to me, that alone, you can rule out that it happened, because if they did pull up, why are they there? They're there to pick him up, right? Well, then why didn't they pick him up?
Yeah, you would think.
Right. Well,
unless he didn't come out and he's longer than a minute, and they waited 2 or 3 minutes for him and he never came out.
So then they just decide we're going to let the passy walk the streets instead of waiting a couple more minutes for him. That doesn't make sense to me.
Depending on what their job was supposed to be, with grabbing Oswald right there, who knows?
Okay,
I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Believe me, and obviously, if you're just going to agree with everything I say, it's going to be a boring conversation.
Right. Yeah, no, I like having fun, because a lot of this, even though I am conspiracy minded, I look at things more. I tend to lean and trust the documents more than I do eyewitness testimony because a lot of it
Sure.
is screwy, and we'll get there when we get to the Tippit witnesses because I'm trying to tell Matt, I'm like, we got all these witnesses, they all saying different shit, and they're all, supposedly right here, but they see something different, and da 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 da.
Yeah.
You're like, oh no, they all pretty much saw the same thing. I'm like,
Mm.
I don't
Yeah.
know. That's not
No.
the impression I get.
Yeah,
And I'll
and
put,
we're going to talk about the witnesses. We're
yeah,
going
we'll
to talk
get
about the witnesses.
there.
But the most of what I wanted to accomplish in these last 10 minutes was just to show everybody watching out there that when you hear conspiracy advocates insist that Oswald could not have got there in time to shoot Tippit, assuming that the shooting was at 1:15, 1:16, not 1:06, 1:07, which we're going to discuss that later also. But if you accept that the shooting was at 1:15, basically, then I just wanted to show that it's possible for him to have gotten there in time. Okay.
Right. And I
So
think those
that's
words have come out of my mouth at some point on this show that there's no way Lee Harvey Oswald could have gotten to the scene of the Tippit crime in time to be the murderer. But again,
so based on what time do you think the shooting, what to make you say that though, what time are we talking about the shooting? Because I
I'm
just
just
showed
saying,
you he could have got there. I
right,
just
we're
showed you
playing
he
a
could have
game
got
of
there by
minutes, right?
1:12.
We're playing a game of minutes here, right?
Right.
And I just don't think he got out of the depository that fast. I mean, and right after that, that soon after, Dealey Plaza's in chaos. There's people everywhere. Uh,
So why don't you think he could have got out of there by 12:33? With Marion Baker, they reconstructed Marion Baker steps, and he did 2 time trials, and they used a stopwatch. And if I recall correctly, this isn't my area of expertise, but if I recall correctly, he did one in 75 seconds and the other one in 90 seconds because they said, okay, go a little slower this time. So it took him 75 seconds and 90 seconds when he did those 2 time trials from the time he jumped off his motorcycle, which is when the shots occurred, to the time he encounters Oswald in the second floor lunchroom. So
I'll
let's
give,
call it a minute and a half.
I'll give
If
you this.
Oswald's in the, yeah,
So from sixth floor window, southwest corner, 12:30, 12:31, roughly, right? I'll give you Oswald or whoever was up there shooting. We'll say Oswald because he was in the building.
okay,
So say he was in sixth floor window. He took the shots. He immediately takes off, runs across the floor, hides the rifle, runs down the stairs with nobody seeing him to the second floor lunchroom to get a drink. Okay? From that point on, he ain't running because there's too many people around and you wouldn't want to draw attention to yourself if you had just done what he was accused of doing, right?
Mhm.
So you want to seem normal at that point. It's, do you agree with that? Like
Yeah,
you wouldn't want to be like running out of the
yeah.
depository at that
I
point.
believe he was going down the stairs with a pretty good pace, but I'm sure he just walked normally across the second floor. Yes,
Right. So he's not rushing out of the school
correct.
depository.
I agree.
The
But
other
my,
problem
my
I have is nobody sees him leaving except Frazier, allegedly.
well,
And
Frazier
Frazier
doesn't even tell that story for 40 years. In his Warren Commission testimony, Bill
tells
Frazier
something
said he didn't
different.
see Oswald anytime after 11.
Well, he tells the story to the sixth floor museum.
Yeah, in 2002 or something like that.
Then he tells something different in the book, the Steering Truth book,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That's.
So who knows what to believe, you know?
But here's the thing, though. So, but you can get from the sniper's nest window to the second floor lunchroom in 90 seconds, and then you can walk from the second floor lunchroom out the front door in 90 seconds.
Yeah, if he's constantly moving and not stopping to think or
Hmm.
if he's just
Yeah,
moving.
but the thing is, that the Warren Commission did not make up the time of 12:33. They did time trials. Okay,
Right. No, I
and
understand.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
But
So my point is, and if my information's wrong, it's wrong. But my point is, if he's walking out of the front steps at 12:33, which is what the Warren Commission concluded,
they don't
then
have
I
any
just
witness for that, do they?
no, there's no way to know. No, I mean,
Right. That's just what they figured.
yeah, of course, he was supposedly encountered the reporter who asked him, where a phone was, as he's
Yeah.
going in, as Oswald's coming out, if you believe that was indeed Oswald, uh, but so my only point was I just wanted to show you that it's possible for Oswald to have got from the front steps to 10th and Patton by 1:12 And it depends on how fast you walk from the rooming house to 10th and Patton yourself, as far as if you
Yeah.
think it was a little bit before 112 or a little bit after 112. So now you have these witnesses along the area of the Tippit shooting, and a block to the east of 10th and Patton is 10th and Denver. All
Mhm.
right, two men were out in the front yard. Two young men were out in the front yard at 10th and Denver on that would be the northeast corner. They were out in the front yard. It was a duplex, coincidentally shared with Frank and Mary Wright, by the way. And
Is one of these
Jimmy Burt,
Jimmy Burt?
Jimmy Burt and Bill Smith. These two guys are out in the front yard, and
I'm glad you bring him up because I just listened to some audio the other day of
yeah,
his interview,
so
and I
yeah,
got
so
questions.
you're talking about the auto he did with Al Chapman in
Yeah,
1968. Yeah.
yeah,
So Jimmy Burt says he saw the guy who would eventually kill the cop walking across the street from him, from his left to his right. In other words,
coming the
walking
wrong
along
way
10th
down the
Street.
street.
Yeah, he's walking along 10th Street. He crosses Denver and continues walking west on 10th towards the intersection with Patton. And Jimmy Burt saw the guy, but Bill Smith never saw the guy because perhaps, and he didn't really clarify here, but perhaps Bill Smith had his back to the sidewalk or something. Who knows? But Jimmy Burt says he saw him. Bill Smith never saw him. And Bill Smith testified to the Warren Commission that he didn't see the guy until they saw the police car pull over. You know, 3/4 of a block down. They're watching this from 3/4 of a block away. They see the police car pull over, and that's when Bill Smith notices the guy was out on the sidewalk, come over, and so they're standing there watching. Burt and Smith are standing there watching the police car, talking to a guy who was walking. The police officer talking to the guy who was walking. Burt says they got ready to go in because they're thinking, okay, well, nothing's happening here. Let's go in and watch news about the assassination. As they were about to go in, they hear the gunshots. Jimmy Burt says, Bill, that guy just shot that cop. They turn back around, and Bill Smith testifies to the Warren Commission that he saw Tippit fall, and he says Oswald running away, but I think he says that because he was accepting that it was Oswald. I don't think he can identify Oswald from 3/4 of a block away when Oswald has his back to him running in the opposite direction. So Jimmy Burt looks, he yells to Bill Smith. Bill Smith looks down the street and sees Tippit fall, and he sees the killer running away. So that's two of the witnesses right there. Then you have Domingo Benavides.
What,
Now,
before we move on to
yeah,
Domingo,
okay,
I have a question about Burt just to clarify something because
okay,
in that interview he says that the person he says shot Tippit is walking west on 10th instead of east,
correct.
which is not the way Oswald would have been coming from if he'd have been coming from his rooming house, correct?
Correct. But
So,
here's the thing. Here's the thing, and I was going to get into this later, but I can do this right now if you want. So, have you read With Malice by Dale Myers?
I have not.
Okay. He puts forth a theory that, and I, okay, let me rephrase this. There's the theory that David Bellin actually investigated when he was doing this, these in 1964, that Oswald was trying to get either to the Jefferson Branch Library or the bus stop right outside the Jefferson Branch Library. Now, the Jefferson Branch Library was located at the intersection of Jefferson and Marsalis. All right. Now, when you're at the rooming house at 1026 North Beckley, and your goal is the Jefferson Branch Library and or the bus stops right outside the library, because it's a busy intersection right there, then there are I think there's 3 to 4 different routes you can take, and all of them are similar in length. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, David Bellin, they interviewed the supervisor of the Dallas Greyhound, and they asked about possibly taking a Greyhound bus down to Laredo to the border. Okay, Laredo, Texas, and the supervisor told them, he testified to the Warren Commission, told them that from the VA hospital, which is further south than Oak Cliff. Okay, it's further south than Oak Cliff. The VA hospital, one can board a Greyhound bus right there at the VA hospital. You don't have to have a bus ticket from the depot in downtown, nothing like that. You can board a Greyhound bus on the open road, and this is what this supervisor testified to. You can board a Greyhound bus on the open road as long as it's safe for the bus to stop, and like there's no traffic behind it. In other words, you could be hitchhiking, and a Greyhound, and the Greyhound bus go by out in the desert. Like, let's say you're hitchhiking to Laredo or something.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Oswald was planning on doing this. But the point is that yes, you can stop a Greyhound bus and hop on, and you just pay the driver right then and there. Now, the VA hospital, which is further south in Oak Cliff, was known for Greyhound buses pulling in and out, and they put forth the theory that Oswald could have been now the bus stop outside the library, the Jefferson Branch Library, again intersection of Jefferson and Marsalis. Oswald had that bus transfer on him, and this transfer was if he catches what's called the Lancaster line, that transfer would have been good until the next available bus comes by, which would have been 1:30. So Oswald, that transfer would have been good on the Lancaster line until 1:30. Okay, he could have used that transfer, taken it, and the Lancaster line takes you straight to the VA hospital. By the way, it's one of the stops on the Lancaster line before it ends up turning around further south and heading back north. So Oswald, whether he knew it or not, who knows? When we're talking about where Oswald was going, all we can do is speculate. We admit that. Okay, admittedly, it's all we can do is speculate. So perhaps Oswald wanted to get to the Greyhound to the VA hospital where he could catch a Greyhound bus. Okay, the transfer would have been good, and then from the Greyhound bus, they asked the supervisor, the Greyhound supervisor in Dallas, how much would it have cost to buy a ticket from Dallas to Laredo, and the answer was $12.80. Well, when he was arrested, Oswald had $13.87 on him. So he had enough money to get a ticket to Laredo. Now, of course, he wouldn't have much money left. But so the theory goes that Oswald's trying to get to what's that?
I was just going to say, I would think, that Oswald would have had some kind of a better getaway plan than he had.
Yeah, if he knew he was going to even make it out alive,
Right. Maybe he didn't think he was going to make it out alive,
Right.
but he did try, and he did succeed. And then now, what are you going to do?
If there was a conspiracy, in my opinion, if he was a patsy, the simple fact that Oswald made it out of the depository tells me there was no conspiracy. Because I believe if there was a conspiracy, he's killed in the depository or right outside. You're not going to allow your patsy to wander the streets of Dallas and Oak Cliff in cabs and buses. That's something you're not going to let your patsy do.
See, that's part of the conspiracy. Is Tippit's waiting at the Gloco station for him to come across in that bus, and then.
But why take it even that far? Why not just kill him right there on the streets of Dallas? As he's walking into town. Why not kill him in the building? Why not kill him on the front steps? These conspirators are so great to murder the president and get away with it, yet they screw up and let the patsy escape the scene. That just, I don't know. But my point is though, what's that?
He didn't escape the transfer.
Oh, well, that's true. Yeah, that was a good one. So, but if Oswald wanted to get to the bus stop at Jefferson and Marsalis to get down to the VA hospital to then board a Greyhound to get to Laredo, so that regarding which direction Jimmy Burt saw Oswald walking, this is what I'm getting at. So Dale Myers, and he mentions this in With Malice, the updated edition. He was looking at the Dallas County, not the Dallas City Police, but the Dallas County Sheriff's transcripts. And so the story goes that T.F. Boley pulls up on the Tippit shooting scene, sees the dead officer lying in the street, goes over to the patrol car. Benavides is trying to work the mic, doesn't know how to do it. Boley pushes him aside. Boley takes the mic, and Boley reports the shooting of the police officer. That's the famous year. Hello, police operator, there's been a shooting out here. All that. That's Boley. And it happens at 117. Okay. So as soon as Boley makes that report, the Dallas County Sheriff's dispatchers, they monitor the city police tapes. All right. They monitor each other. The Dallas County Sheriff dispatcher puts out a bulletin to all the patrol units throughout Dallas County about a shooting of a city police officer, on 10th Street in Oak Cliff. Now, what happens is a Unit 109, and we don't know who he is, but Unit 109, and if you ever can get a hold of the Dallas County Sheriff transcripts, you can read this for yourself. Unit 109 reports to his dispatcher, hey, I'm near Jefferson and 10th. Do you want me to assist? Now, Jefferson and 10th might sound weird to you if you think of the Tippit scene. However, 10th curves to the right, Jefferson curves to the left down there. They actually intersect, believe it or not. So point being, if Oswald is walking, he gets to 10th and Patton around 112. He's walking east on 10th Street with the goal of getting to the library at 10th and Jefferson. I'm sorry, at Jefferson and Marsalis to get to the bus stop. Now we know that there's a Unit 109 who reported from that area just after the Tippit shooting. So the point being, if he was there just after, maybe he was there just before as well. Oswald sees him and gets spooked because 10th Street curves to the right about 2 blocks east of 10th and Patton. So Oswald's walking along 10th Street. Just got a picture of this. He's walking along 10th. He wants to go to Marsalis. He wants to take a right on Marsalis to go to the bus stop because the bus stop's only 1 block down. When 10th Street curves, you can't see anything east of that curve until you get to the curve on 10th Street. It's at 10th and Lansing. But when 10th Street makes that curve, now a whole other world opens up to you. And so possibly this Unit 109, this Dallas County Sheriff deputy, was sitting maybe eating his lunch in a parking lot 3 or 4 blocks down. Who knows? Oswald perhaps sees this law enforcement vehicle sitting down there, doesn't want to walk anywhere near it, and does an about face. Now he's walking west on 10th Street to be noticed by Jimmy Burt. You understand what I'm saying? And I timed this walk with Matt Douthit, and it took us a minute from the patrol car. We walked to the curve on 10th Street. It took us a minute and 54 seconds to walk, and I walked it with Matt. And then let's say Oswald sees that law enforcement vehicle down a few blocks, doesn't want to walk past him because, again, Oswald doesn't know if his name or his face is all over the news yet. Again, we know it wasn't, but he doesn't know what's going on. So he does an about face. Now he's walking west on 10th Street back towards 10th and Denver to be seen by Jimmy Burt crossing over Denver, continuing west to encounter Tippit down at the next block. It's only a theory. It's only speculating, but we know that Unit 109 reported from there shortly after the Tippit shooting, so maybe he was there before as well. That's so now you can get Oswald walking west on 10th as seen by Burt, still in time. If he gets 10th and Patton at 112, then he's right back there at 1:15:40 or 1:15:50, which could have been the time he encounters Tippit because Benavides jumps on there and starts keying the mic around 1:15 to 1:16. I'm only trying to address your question about Jimmy Burt saying the guy was walking east to west.
So is this before or after Helen Markham goes over to the dying J.D. Tippit and consoles him for a minute or two when she's the only one around?
Yeah. So let's go. So we have Bill Smith and Jimmy Burt. They're at 10th and Denver.
Yeah,
They're watching the police car talk to the guy who was walking. They hear the shots, look down the street. Bill Smith sees Tippit fall, sees the guy run away towards the corner at 10th and Patton. And then you have Benavides. Now, Benavides was working on a broken down vehicle, interestingly enough, on Patton between 10th and Jefferson, which is pretty interesting. Never found out to this day who the owner of that vehicle was, but he's working on this vehicle. It's broken down. He needs to run over to an auto parts store located over on Marsalis. He gets in his truck, drives through the alley that runs parallel with 10th and Jefferson. It backed up against the Deutsch Motor lot or Harris Brothers. He turns left on Denver, takes a right on 10th. Now he's heading towards Marsalis, which is where the auto parts store was. Realizes he forgot the part number. I think it was a carburetor. Realized he forgot the part number. He turns around. Now he's driving back towards 10th and Denver. He crosses over 10th and Denver. And as he's driving on 10th towards 10th and Patton, that's when the shooting happens, and he swerves his truck over to the right, almost up onto the curb, and he ducks down. Okay,
right.
So you have Burt and Smith in the front yard watching. You have Benavides now ducking down in his truck. Then you have Helen Markham. She was walking to her bus stop, which is located at the corner of Jefferson and Patton. Her bus stop was right there at that corner, Jefferson and Patton, a block south of the eventual shooting scene. So she's walking south on Patton. As she's approaching the corner, she sees Tippit's patrol car slowly cruise through the intersection from her right to her left. In other words, Tippit was driving from the west to the east. And as she gets to the corner, she looks down 2 houses down, and she notices the patrol car pulls over, and there was a guy on the sidewalk. Now, by the way, Helen Markham said that the guy who shot the police officer, which she identified as Oswald, but she said she watched him walk on 10th Street from the west to the east. In other words, right in front of Scoggins' cab, walk in the same direction that Tippit's patrol car would have been cruising moments later. And she said if you read her testimony, she even saw the guy step up onto the curb and continue walking on the sidewalk. This would be in front of the Barbara Davis, Virginia Davis house, and he continues walking east, and then Tippit pulls up behind him, moments later. So if you believe Markham,
she says, because
she directly contradicts Jimmy Burt as far as which way the guy was walking.
Plus, she was headed down, if I'm not mistaken, She was heading down to Jefferson to catch a bus
Correct.
to
The bus
work,
was at Jefferson and Patton.
right? And the bus normally came at what time?
So the FBI did a study, and they found that there was a bus stop there at 112 and 122, and every 10 minutes thereafter. So
Okay.
so Joseph Ball asked her what time she gets her bus. She says 1:15. Now, first of all, it's a strange way to ask a question. What time do you get your bus? What does that mean? Do you get on the bus? You get to the bus stop? Why didn't he just say what time do you get on the bus or what time is but anyway, so she says 1:15. There is no 1:15 stop right there. It's either 112 or 122. So the conspiracy advocates will like to say that Helen Markham says she was catching the bus at 112. No, she never says 112. She never says 112.
If she's
And
looking,
quite honestly, if she always got there at 1:15, because that is the only time she gave regarding the bus was 1:15. That's the only time she ever gives. If she continually gets there at 1:15, she's always going to miss that 112 bus unless the bus occasionally runs a few minutes late. So my point is, for every time a conspiracy advocate argues that she was on her way to catch the bus at 112, I can also argue that it was 122
yeah,
because she
I
says
didn't know
115.
another bus was coming 10 minutes later.
Right,
Because
right,
if
exactly.
she's telling the truth, then then the shooting happened much earlier than we think. Right.
Yeah. So yeah, she said she left her apartment at one, a few minutes after one, and she said she estimated she reached the corner of 10th and Patton at 106, 107.
Does
So a lot of conspiracy advocates would like to argue that therefore the shooting occurred at 107, and we're going to address that. Believe me, I'm going to address that too.
Okay.
Regarding the time of the shooting, but I got them in order here. So right now we're just talking about the witnesses.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
don't let me forget, but we'll get back to Markham's 106. I know that's what you're getting at. But yeah, as far as the identifications and those witnesses that saw the shooting, Markham's approaching the corner. She looks down the street. The police officer is pulled over, and she's watching this. And she testifies a nice, friendly conversation. She said Tippit got out, didn't seem alarmed or anything. Was nice and calm. Then all of a sudden, Oswald steps back from the patrol car, pulls out his revolver, and fires a number of shots, striking Tippit, and Tippit falls. And of course, Oswald then takes off for the corner. So you got Markham standing at the corner. So to recap, we have Jimmy Burt and Bill Smith in the front yard, a block to the east. We have Benavides right there 15 feet from the spot where Tippit fell, ducking down in his truck. And we have Markham standing on the corner of 10th and Patton, the northwest corner, watching the shooting go down and the killer running in her direction, but across the street. Then we have Barbara Davis and Virginia Davis. First of all, let's go to William Scoggins because he actually saw the shooting as well. So Scoggins is in his cab. He's sitting at the intersection of 10th and Patton.
Eating a
He's
Sunday.
on Patton. He's on Patton facing north. He's facing the intersection. And he's eating his lunch. He notices Tippit's patrol car cruise slowly through the intersection. Same thing that Markham saw, but Markham was on the other side of the street. From Scoggins' position, the Tippit's patrol car was cruising from the left to his right, cruising east on 10th Street. Scoggins says that the cop went on down. He saw him stop a couple houses down, and he said he went back to eating his lunch, and then he hears a shot or a number of shots. He says he looked up and he saw Tippit clutch at his chest and fall to the ground. And then he noticed that the guy who was talking to Scoggins through the passenger window starts running in his direction. Scoggins gets out and he starts to run across the street away from the approaching gunman, realized he had nowhere to go and he was safer to return back to his cab. So Scoggins is ducking behind the trunk by the back driver's side tire as Oswald is, jumping the hedges and then, heading south on Patton. Scoggins says something interesting here. He said that the killer, who he identified as Oswald, but he said the killer mumbled to himself, "Poor damn cop" or "Poor dumb cop." Scoggins wasn't sure which one he said, but he said it twice. "Poor damn cop" or "Poor dumb cop." Now we're going to pause for a second right here because Robert Oswald wrote a book. And in this book, he talks about living in Fort Worth after Lee returned home from Russia. They were in the car one day, and Robert Oswald runs a yellow light, I guess basically turns red. He gets pulled over. Police officer walks up and basically tells Robert, "I'm pulling you over because you ran a red light back there." And Robert says to the police officer, "Well, yeah, I had somebody right on my back bumper, and I felt like if I would have stopped, he would have hit me. So I felt it best to go through the intersection." It didn't matter. The police officer cited him for running the red light. Okay. Robert Oswald in his book tells how after getting the citation, the cop was walking back. Oswald in the passenger seat looked over his shoulder and said, "Dumb cop." So that doesn't make Oswald a cop killer at 10th and Patton, okay? But Robert Oswald tells a story. Oswald's like, "Dumb cop." And then William Scoggins says that the guy mumbled to himself twice, "Poor damn cop" or "Poor dumb cop," as he was jumping the bushes and heading south on Patton. So do with that information what you want, but I just figured your listeners, your watchers might like to know it. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, yeah, I
So
agree.
so we have Scoggins ducking down behind his cab. We have the killer running towards him and then heading south on Patton. Okay. Now we have the Davis sisters, Barbara Davis and Virginia Davis. They're in the house on the corner of 10th and Patton. That would be the southeast corner. They're putting the kids down to bed for a nap, I guess. They hear the shots. Coincidentally, they each testified, if I remember right, that they only heard two shots. Nevertheless, they hear the shots. They go to the front door, and they're almost shoulder to shoulder at the front door. Barbara Davis gets there first, and she says the first thing she noticed was Helen Markham across the street, catty corner, yelling, he shot that police officer, he shot that man. That's the first thing Barbara Davis saw was Helen Markham. Then she readjusts her attention, refocuses, and then she notices the gunman cutting across their front yard because there was no fence. He was cutting diagonally across their yard. And Barbara Davis and Virginia Davis both stood there at the front door, saw this guy basically either loading or unloading the revolver, but he was messing with the revolver as he was cutting across the front yard. Barbara Davis says that he looked at her and he kind of gave a little smile as he was making it and just kept right on going. But he kind of looked at Barbara Davis, gave that little smile. This is what she testified to. Okay. So at this moment, Rob, we have Jimmy Burt and Bill Smith in the yard, a block to the east in the front yard. We have Benavides ducking down in his truck, peeping up, watching what's going on. We have Markham at the corner, covered her face, dropping to her knees, screaming. We have Scoggins ducking down behind the trunk of his cab, and we have Barbara Davis and Virginia Davis standing at the front door, watching the guy cut across the yard. So now let's turn it. Now we're no longer on 10th Street. Now we're going south on Patton.
Well, where's Akila Clemens, or was she even there?
Do you want to talk about the witnesses who came forth earlier? Or do you want to talk about the witnesses who came in after the fact, out of the woodwork? I mean,
I'm just asking. I didn't know if you put her
okay,
there or
so
not.
no, well, Akila Clemens. First of all, Mark Lane put a little spin on it. Akila Clemens never ever implies that the two men she talks about were together. Yet Mark Lane wants to make it sound like she's saying that two men killed Tippit. You can watch her interview on Rush to Judgment. She never says the two guys are together. Okay. And then Shirley Martin interviews her uh, in the summer of '64, and there's transcripts, and there's no mention whatsoever that these two men were together. So don't be fooled by Mark Lane. I do believe Clemens saw something. All right.
Well,
But
if she
I,
was there, where was she in the?
so she tells Mark Lane that Mark Lane says, so you heard the shots and then you ran out of the house. Well, that would imply that she was inside when she heard the shots. She didn't see the shooting because Akila Clemens once stated that when she heard the shots, she thought they were firecrackers. So she doesn't even see this going on between the police officer and the guy walking. She just hears the shot. She goes out the door, and maybe she sees something like the gunman fleeing. Uh, but I like to stick with witnesses that come forward right away. I don't like using witnesses after the fact, which is also why, even though Jack Tatum says it was Oswald, because we don't hear from him until the House Select Committee assassination investigation, you won't hear me mention Jack Tatum. As a matter of fact, I was talking to you about the witnesses on 10th Street. I was already ready to go down Patton, and I didn't mention Jack Tatum to you, even though he was on 10th Street. I don't rely on witnesses that we hear 15 years later, just the same as I'm not going to rely on Akila Clemens, who we hear from not until 7 or 8 months later, just before the Warren Commission released their report. The Warren Commission didn't even learn about Akila Clemens until like the final month, and it was too late by that time. They'd already wrapped things up and were getting the report out.
There was another one Matt mentioned. Holman. Is there a
Holman.
Holman
Um,
that supposedly lived around right around the corner?
you're talking about Doris Holan, Holan.
Holan. Yeah, yeah,
Holan. Okay.
yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. That's all right. So again, do you want me to talk about real witnesses or made up witnesses afterwards?
Yeah.
Okay. So ask me about Doris Holan later. Don't let me forget though. Okay.
All right.
Okay. So in the meantime, now we have Oswald heading south on Patton, and if you're Oswald and you just jump the bushes right there in the Davis front yard, now you're going south on Patton. The first thing you're going to see is Sam Ginyard halfway down the block at the alley looking up at you. And then about 50 feet past him, Ted Calloway's on the sidewalk looking up at you. You're going to see these two men looking up at you. So you're going to cross the street. So Oswald cuts across the street. Now he's going down Patton on the other side of the street as Ginyard and Calloway. Okay. And Ginyard and Calloway are watching him run the full length of the street all the way down to the corner of Patton and Jefferson. And it was at this point, just before Oswald reaches the corner, when Ted Calloway yells out, "Hey, man, what the hell is going on?" Because Calloway heard the gunshots and he sees Oswald running with a gun. Calloway later testified to the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and he said, "I didn't know that he had just killed a cop. Obviously, if I would have known that, I wouldn't have yelled at him."
Yeah.
He goes, "I didn't know, that he just gunned down a cop." So both of these guys, Ginyard and Calloway, they watch the killer reach the corner and then proceed to head. He turns right on Jefferson, so now he's heading west on Jefferson Boulevard. Now, one more group of witnesses, and then I'm done with the witnesses. At the Johnny Reynolds Motor Company, one full block south of the shooting scene, you had Warren Reynolds, Pat Patterson, Harold Russell, and L.J. Lewis. Now, these four guys are at the Johnny Reynolds Motor Company. They hear the shot. They all four hear the gunshots. It's a block north of them. They go and look, and they notice a man with a gun running down Patton. Now, he's coming straight towards them because, remember, they're block south of the shooting scene. Oswald's running south on Patton, or the killer is running south on Patton. And these four men watched the guy running with a gun. They saw him reach the corner of Patton with Jefferson. And all four of them basically state that he tucked his revolver into his waistband and then started to walk instead of running. So if you're Oswald or you're the killer, you're like, hey, new street, new demeanor. I'm past all of those witnesses that I had to run. Now I can walk on Jefferson because now people I'm going to encounter on Jefferson don't know anything about what just happened on Patton. I'm speculating as to why Oswald would have started walking at this point. He didn't want to draw attention to himself. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
So these are your witnesses. So to recap, Jimmy Burt, Bill Smith, that's 2. Benavides is 3. Markham is 4. Scoggins is 5. The Davis sisters is 6 and 7. Ginyard and Calloway are 8 and 9. And then the 4 guys at the Johnny Reynolds Motor Company, L.J. Lewis, Pat Patterson, Harold Russell, Warren Reynolds. That's 13 witnesses that either saw the shooting or they saw the killer running with a gun. Now, these are your real 13 witnesses. Now, Clemens may have seen the guy running away with a gun. She still didn't say it was 2 men. Okay. Nevertheless, but Matt on your show and everywhere else likes to talk about all these other witnesses way out to the east on 10th Street. The people working at working on the building the apartment complex at 10th and Denver, et cetera, et cetera. These aren't your witnesses. They didn't see the shooting and or the guy running away with a gun. Okay, I'm just talking about the real witnesses, and I'm also talking about people you hear from in November, December, and January of 63 and 64, not people you hear from conspiracy authors in the 80s and 90s, et cetera. Okay.
Yeah, newly found witnesses.
Yeah, I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to, if I'm not going to rely on Jack Tatum, I'm not going to rely on other witnesses who aren't saying anything until 1980 something.
It's the same thing with any other aspect of the assassination. You got the people coming out of the woodwork years later. And,
right.
Can you really trust what they say or what they saw?
Yeah. Everybody, sometimes people like to insert themselves into the story so they can get their 15 minutes of fame. And Gordon Arnold, Ed Hoffman, Beverly Oliver, but that's a whole other topic. And we can talk about that too later if you want to. So regarding these 13 witnesses, who I consider the real 13 witnesses, okay, Jimmy Burt and Bill Smith were interviewed by the FBI. Neither one of them could say it was Oswald, but they didn't say it wasn't Oswald. They just couldn't say that it was Oswald, okay? That's Jimmy Burt and Bill Smith. Benavides in his pickup truck, he couldn't say it was Oswald. In fact, he was asked to go to a lineup that night and declined, saying, I wouldn't be of any help. I can't. So he's not saying it's not Oswald. He just didn't. He felt like I couldn't say one way or the other. And then you have Helen Markham, who attended a lineup that night, did pick Oswald. You have Barbara Davis and Virginia Davis, who attended a lineup that night. They picked Oswald. Both of them did. You have William Scoggins, who attended a lineup on Saturday. Oswald was the man in the lineup before he starts creating his commotion and making a scene of, a mess of things. And so Scoggins said it was Oswald. Ginyard and Calloway attended a lineup on Friday night. Both of them picked Oswald. Now, the 4 guys at the Johnny Reynolds Motor Company, 3 of them, Warren Reynolds, Pat Patterson, and Warren Reynolds, Pat Patterson, and Harold Russell, those 3 told the FBI they were of opinion that the man was Oswald. The 4th guy, L.J. Lewis, said he wasn't sure one way or the other. So we have 13 witnesses, and we have Jimmy Burt and Bill Smith, Benavides, and L.J. Lewis. You have these 4 guys, these 4 witnesses. They weren't sure the guy was Oswald, but they didn't say he wasn't Oswald. The other 9 witnesses, either through the lineups or FBI statements, said basically the guy was Oswald. But you have 0 of the 13 saying it wasn't Oswald. So you have 4 people indifferent. 9 said it was Oswald. 0 of the 13 said it wasn't Oswald.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the lineups situation.
Mhm. So let me tell you this: Jim Lavelle was responsible for most of those lineups, and this guy. So, like I told you earlier, I sat in his living room for 6 hours. One of the things I made a point to ask him, like I said, we talked about the assassination for the first hour. The last 5 hours, he was telling us police stories. He was loving it. Every time he would finish a story, we were like, "Should we leave? Is he getting tired?" And he would pause for 10 or 15 seconds of awkward silence, and then he would say, "Let's see. Did I tell you guys the one about?" And then he'd go again for another 15 minutes. He was loving it. And of course, we're hanging on his every word, so he can talk about whatever he wants. But one of the things I asked him in that first hour when we were talking about the assassination was the lineups. And he specifically stated that obviously we thought there was going to be a trial. We conducted the lineups in a manner in which the identifications would be allowed at a trial. In other words, Jim Lavelle verifies basically that the lineups were legitimate. And Jim Lavelle was a 14-year at the time of the assassination. He's a 14-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department, including 5 years working as a detective for Will Fritz in the Homicide and Robbery Bureau. Okay, the guy knew how to conduct lineups that were going to stand up in court. Jim Lavelle felt, and he told me this personally, and I'm sure he says in interviews on YouTube, that the lineups were perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with the lineups, and so that's what I'm gonna, you know, he could have said the lineups were jacked up, and I would accept it. But he said they were perfectly legitimate, so I'm accepting that. Regardless of which way he would have put it, I'm going to accept his word either way. He says the lineups were legitimate because we conducted them in a manner, because the last thing we wanted is for the lineup identifications to be thrown out and not allowed in court.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just saying from just my viewpoint of thinking, and I've seen the lineup photos.
Mhm.
You're
What
gonna
photos
get
have you seen?
the lineup photos.
Yeah, but please tell me that you're not talking about the men wearing suit and tie.
No,
Okay, good, because that's a super that's a Oswald stuck in the middle of those guys. So let me tell you about that real quick, and you probably know this, but a lot of conspiracy advocates, not knowing any better, they'll post the photo of the two men actually wearing a suit and tie
yeah,
jacket.
I know which photo you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah, then Oswald, and then you got the Don Abels, the clerk, wearing that vest. What happened was in June of '64, the FBI visited these men who appeared in the lineups with Oswald, and they took the picture of those three men because they just wanted to know what the guys looked like who were in the lineup. And suit and tie, and a sweater vest happened to be what these guys were wearing, or whatever Abels was wearing in that photo. That afternoon, they were visited by the FBI. They're not trying to represent what they were wearing in the lineups. As a matter of fact, if you read their testimony, Perry, Clark, and Abels, Detectives Perry and Clark, and then Don Abels was a jail clerk. All three of them tell you what they were wearing during the lineups. None of them were wearing a suit, jacket, and a tie. So conspiracy advocates who don't know any better, they'll post that photo. Look at Oswald in a T-shirt next to a guy in a suit. Of course, you're going to pick Oswald, and that would be a valid point if that's indeed how the lineups look.
bruised face.
Yeah. Now, I will tell you that I wish that they would have. I wish that they would have put a Band-Aid on Oswald's bruised face and put a Band-Aid on all the other guys in the lineup as well. I wish they would have done that.
Is you have a disheveled, beat up looking dude in some ratty ass clothes, and then two cops and a jail clerk. I mean, come on.
But remember one thing: when these witnesses when these four men are walked out and paraded in front of these witnesses, the witnesses are not asked. Pick the guy who most resembled the guy you saw either shoot the cop or run from the scene with a gun. Yeah, but the witnesses were not asked to pick the guy who most resembled the man they saw. They were asked, "Is the man you saw among these four?" So regardless of what the other three guys might have looked like, they're not going to pick Oswald because he looked most like the guy they saw, because the other guys in the lineup were dressed neater than Oswald. They're picking Oswald because he was the guy they saw, and that's an important distinction to remember.
Maybe, but thinking about Helen Markham and how hysterical she was, and dragging her down there and to view a lineup at that point, I just don't know how accurate she would have been, because if if you just witness a cop getting killed, even now, you or me or her or whoever, and they bring you down to a lineup, they bring four guys out, and maybe in your head somewhere you're not really sure, but it's got to be one of these guys, or else they wouldn't be showing me this lineup.
But
so
again, Helen Markham wasn't asked
you
to.
want to identify somebody for them, and
Sure. I mean, I hear you. You would like to think a witness wouldn't take that stance. You would like to think a witness would say, "Hey, the man I saw is none of those four, so I'm not going to pick a guy out just for the sake of picking a guy." You would like to think a witness isn't going to point to someone innocent, when they're going to go to
Yeah.
life, death row. But here's the interesting part. So Helen Markham did testify. The number two man was the man I saw shoot the officer. Yet Benavides was 15 feet away and said, "I can't go to a lineup because I feel like I can't make an identification." And it's just interesting how, like you said a minute ago, one witness is different than the next, and none of us know what kind of a witness we'll make until we're in that situation.
But all right, so now we're here. So when Markham says after the policeman was shot, she went over to him and nobody else was around and he was still alive and she was consoling him. Does that make any sense whatsoever?
Well, so something that a lot of conspiracy advocates will say, because they don't really read Markham's testimony, is they'll say, "Hello, Markham says she talked to Tippit for 20 minutes." It's not what she says. She says she was trying to talk to him, but he never said anything back. So she's not talking to Tippit for 20. They like to make it sound like she was having a conversation with Tippit. She never said that. But what happened was so Frank Cimino, he came out of his house after Oswald was already gone, and he goes over to Tippit along with Markham, and both of them said that. Frank Cimino said in an affidavit or statement to the FBI, one or the other, that basically Tippit moved slightly and groaned. Now, this is after Oswald's already gone. Tippit did this. And this is according to Frank Cimino. Now, again, Cimino gets out there, Oswald's gone. So this is at least 45 seconds after the shooting. And here we have Tippit moving slightly and groaning. And so it's like agonal respirations is what they call it, maybe what Tippit did. Yeah. And perhaps there was something like that. And maybe Markham was trying to talk to him. I can't explain Markham saying anything more. First of all, we know Markham wasn't with him for 20 minutes. So she did make a few comments that, even as a lone nutter, which I am, take issue with. She wasn't alone with Tippit for even a minute and a half. Frank Cimino was there immediately, not to mention other people. And you got Benavides in his truck. So Benavides, he tells Eddie Barker for the Warren Report, CBS TV, Part 3, 1967. He's interviewed by Eddie Barker. And Benavides says, he's ducking in his truck. Benavides says, I watched him go around the corner, and then I sat there for a second or two, then I got out. How long does it take to go from the patrol car to the corner? 20, 25 seconds. Benavides is out of his truck at 30 seconds. So Markham is not alone with Tippit for any length of time. Unless she simply did see, maybe she doesn't see Benavides on the mic because she's kneeling down. If there's anything she can do for Tippit, I'm not a Helen Markham apologist. I'm just telling you what she saw and what she said.
Yeah, I know. The things like don't match with what Virginia Davis says about immediately after the shots, and I was talking to Matt about the number of shots. Nobody, I think out of all the witnesses, one person got the amount of shots right, like 4 shots.
Yeah, 4 shots. Yeah. But was there 5 shots? There could have been 5 shots and 1 shot missed. That's possible as well.
And using a revolver, a handgun, you can pull the trigger a whole lot faster than if you're working a bolt on a rifle. You can go
absolutely
bang, 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 bang.
Oswald could have fired 4 or 5 shots across that hood in 2.5 seconds at the longest.
It could have sounded like 2 shots.
Yeah. So, but it doesn't matter what the witnesses said regarding how many shots they heard, because we know Barbara Davis and Virginia Davis, who both said they heard 2 shots, we know they're wrong because Tippit had 4 bullets removed from his body,
right.
If you count the uniform button bullet. So we know that they're wrong. And therefore, I mean, what does it doesn't, regarding Oswald's guilt, it doesn't matter what witnesses say regarding how many shots they heard. It doesn't mean anything at all, really.
I was just saying what they immediately said as far as right after the shooting. I don't think they ever said they saw Helen Markham with the down by the cop or anybody else.
So I guess it all depends on how quick Helen Markham went to the body after Oswald went around the corner. Are you implying that Markham wasn't there, or?
No, I'm just implying that maybe I don't believe she ran over to Officer Tippit at all.
Okay.
If she was so scared and hysterical about what just happened,
all
these other people around, I mean, and she's going to be the only one that goes over there, but nobody else sees her go over there, or I don't know. There's just so many different.
Do you know who Franklin Griffin is? Franklin Griffin, by any chance? He's a witness. He's a witness that. He's on Facebook. He's in the Facebook groups. He's a witness that came. He was there. He was working for the construction company at the corner of 10th and Denver, the one right across the street from the front yard Jimmy Burt and Bill Smith were in. And he said he went down to the scene moments later, and he saw the waitress there. I think what he said was he saw the nurse there. He mistook Helen Markham's waitress uniform for a nurse's uniform. So if you believe Franklin Griffin, then he is a witness who sees Helen Markham there. And
I don't believe Franklin Griffin.
okay, I mean, yeah, I'm not gonna. I don't rely on him one way or the other, but I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah,
saying he does say he saw the nurse there, but he's talking about Markham.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Franklin
Somebody
Griffin's
wanted
not a
me to ask
witness.
you. Somebody wanted
Yeah,
me
go
to
ahead.
ask you about what you thought about them finding a wallet at the Tippit scene.
Okay. Well,
Do you,
we know that a wallet is being filmed. Ron Ryland captures the wallet being studied. Uh, However, so the wallet story goes that I do believe that they're looking at a wallet in the film footage, even though I'm not 100% convinced. It could be some kind of a Tippit notebook or something, but I believe, gun to my head, it's a wallet because Ron Reland is narrating when he's back at the offices and it's on television. He's narrating to the audience what's going on, and he says there's the officer's wallet because he thought it was Tippit's wallet. So anyway, I do believe there's a wallet. But here's the thing. So the story goes from FBI agent Bob Barrett that he gets to the scene and Captain Westbrook's holding a wallet right there at the scene. And Westbrook, knowing that Bob Barrett was with the division of the FBI that worked with hardened criminals as opposed to white collar crimes, Westbrook asked, "Hey, do you know an Oswald or a Hiddell, a Lee Oswald or AJ Hiddell?" And Westbrook, I'm sorry, Barrett says, "No, I've never heard those names." And according to Barrett, I think it was a 1983 newspaper interview when the story comes out. That's when it first comes out. But then it's also mentioned by James Hosty in his book Assignment Oswald, I think in '96. So here's the thing regarding the wallet and those identifications. So the answer to the question is yes, they're looking at a wallet, in my opinion. But is it a wallet that had Oswald and Heidel identifications in it? That's the $1 million question. Okay. Now, if Captain Westbrook is really holding a wallet and he asked Bob Barrett right there at the scene, "Hey, do you know the names Lee Oswald or AJ Hiddell?" And Barrett says no. If that's indeed happening, then why isn't, if they suspect this is the wallet of the cop killer, why isn't his name put out over the police radio waves, like APB, be on the lookout for an Oswald or a Hiddell? That never happened. Okay, and don't you think they would have? Don't you think that Westbrook would have done that if he's standing there at Tippett's patrol car holding the killer's wallet? Don't you think they would have put it over the police radio to the dispatcher, who then can put it out to everyone? So let me tell you this: after Oswald was
Westbrook wasn't up to no good that day, yes.
yeah,
Yes.
after Oswald was arrested, okay, they took him back to headquarters, and then all the officers involved in the arrest they were inside Captain Westbrook's office, a small office considering how many men were back in there. And this is where they were filling out their arrest reports. The wallet was there in Westbrook's office at this moment. Barrett is inside Westbrook's office at this moment. It's Westbrook's office, so Westbrook is there. Maybe Barrett is not a liar. Maybe he's simply in 1983, which is 20 years later, is simply misremembering when it was, okay, that Westbrook asked him about the names Oswald and Heidel inside the wallet. So I'm not saying Barrett's a liar, but what I'm saying is maybe he's misremembering, thinking that it happened at the patrol car at 10th and Patton when the reality is it happened back inside Westbrook's office. Because we know Westbrook, Barrett, and the wallet were all three present inside Westbrook's office at this time. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
Not saying for sure that's what happened, but I'm saying it's something to at least consider.
Because if it was a wallet, because I mean, it does make sense if you're Tippit, you're pulling up on somebody on the side of the road, you say, "Hey, buddy, come here, let me see some ID." Somebody reaches into their wallet, "Here you go," and Tippit's like, "Well, this guy, huh?" And gets out of his car, and then Oswald's like, "Oh shit!" Boom, 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 boom.
Mm-hmm.
But that would mean that Lee Harvey Oswald had two wallets on him because he had one on him when he was arrested at the theater, and he dropped, and Tippett's got the one at the scene. Or
a hardcore low nutter could simply say, "Okay, so they found Oswald's wallet at the scene. Further proof that he killed Tippit."
right? But then they're lying about finding
Right.
one later.
Right. Because when Oswald was arrested, for those who don't know, when Oswald was arrested at the Texas Theater, they got him in the car. They're driving to headquarters, and Bob Carroll I believe it was Bob Carroll. Gerald Hill asked for identification, and he told Bob Carroll, who was in the back seat. Gerald Hill's in the front seat. Bob Carroll's in the back seat. He pulls the wallet out of Oswald's pocket, and that's when they had this whole discussion. So yeah, the official story is that Oswald's wallet was pulled out of his back pants pocket when they were in the car driving back to headquarters after the arrest in the theater. So yeah.
Yep. And
But my point is it's a very good possibility that Baird is simply misremembering, and that same wallet that was taken from Oswald inside the car ends up at Westbrook's office. And we do know for a fact that Westbrook, Baird, and the wallet were all three in Westbrook's office at the same time. And maybe that's when it was discussed.
it's possible, or somebody who was impersonating Oswald had a wallet with Oswald identification in it.
Well, fiction is fun. Fiction is fun.
Harvey,
Hey, listen, man in building shoots man in car is boring.
it is.
So
It is.
yeah, so you got to juice it up a little bit. So regarding the evidence against Oswald, though, okay. So I've already told you about the witnesses. 13 witnesses. 9 of them said it was Oswald. And by the way, one of the witnesses that I say of the 9 is Warren Reynolds. And a lot of people say, well, Warren Reynolds, he didn't say it was Oswald until he got shot in the head. Then he says it was Oswald. Okay, but here's the thing, and this is what these people don't realize. 2 days before he was shot, he's interviewed by the FBI. I think it was January 20th, 1964. The report comes out on January 21st, and then he's shot on the 22nd. He told the FBI 2 days before he shot that he was of the opinion that the man he saw was Oswald.
I thought that's why the conspiracy is, that's why he was shot, is because he thought it was Oswald.
Well, if you're the conspirators, you want him to
changed
say
his
that.
mind after talking to General Walker.
Yeah. So the interesting part about Warren Reynolds, he was like bridge partners or something with General Walker, which is a fascinating, crazy coincidence kind of story.
Bridge partners, right?
You can add the Warren Reynolds and relationship with General Walker to the whole things that make you go, huh?
Yeah.
But anyway, regarding the evidence against Oswald, besides the eyewitnesses, 9 said it was Oswald, 4 said they weren't sure, 0 said it was not Oswald. All right. Now you have Oswald on Jefferson Boulevard. He gets down to the next block and he goes behind the Texaco station. Well, Robert Brock was a mechanic at the Texaco station, and his wife Mary Brock was there. Mary Brock, they both saw the guy wearing a jacket disappear, run past them, and disappear behind the Texaco station. The FBI visited these two folks, and Robert Brock said he wasn't sure if it was Oswald or not. Mary Brock said it was Oswald. Okay, so now you can, if you count these two, I don't count these with the other 13 because the other 13 are actually shooting witnesses. The guy's running with the gun. Mary Brock and Robert Brock, Oswald already had the gun tucked away in his waistband at this point, or inside the jacket pocket. But so they're not witnesses to the Tippit shooting, but they are witnesses to a man fleeing wearing a jacket going behind the Texaco station. Now, here's the interesting part. So remember when I told you earlier about Jimmy Burt and Bill Smith? They were a block to the east of the shooting scene. After Oswald disappears around the corner, they go down to Tippit's body and they stay there momentarily, and then they decide they're going to go off in search of the killer. So they go over to the corner and they start heading south on Patton. Jimmy Burt tells Al Chapman in that interview that you listened to the other day, Jimmy Burt tells Al Chapman, we had it in our minds we were going to go all the way down to Patton. I'm sorry, all the way down to Jefferson. He goes, but when we got halfway down, we got to the alley. We looked a block to the west, and we saw the guy in the alley, almost down to the next street. That's a direct quote. He was almost down to the next street, which would have been Crawford. And then we lost our nerves, and we went back up to the scene. It's almost like once they saw him, they decided we don't want to chase him anymore. So then they went back up to the scene, of the patrol car.
He was already too far gone at that point.
Yeah, he was a whole block. He was a whole block to the west of where they were. But they said he was in the alley, which, by the way, would put him directly behind the Texaco station. Okay, we know a jacket. We know a jacket was found underneath the car in the parking lot behind the Texaco station. When Oswald's seen by Johnny Brewer, so Oswald is on Jefferson Boulevard. A police car is approaching from behind him. He ducks into the vestibule, the breezeway, whatever you want to call it, the front door entrance of the Hardy shoe store.
Yeah.
Johnny Brewer testified. He gave an affidavit, first of all, what the guy was wearing. Doesn't mention a jacket, even mentions the shirt, doesn't mention a jacket. And then in his Warren Commission testimony, he's describing what the guy was wearing. He's asked, was he wearing a jacket? And he says no. So here's my $1 million question. Remember earlier in this interview, Rob, and I asked you, I said, you know what? You were talking about the color of the jacket when Earlene Roberts saw him go out the front door. If it was you said it was a dark one, even though she told a reporter it was a short gray coat. Let's call it, remember what I said? It could be a rainbow colored jacket. Let's call it red, white, and blue. It doesn't matter. Here's the thing. What happened to the jacket Oswald was wearing when he walked out of the front door of the rooming house by the time he's seen by Johnny Brewer? Why? Forget 10th and Patton. Forget the murder of a police officer. Forget the jacket found under the car. Forget all that stuff. We know he left the rooming house wearing a jacket, regardless of what color you want to think it was. You even acknowledged he was wearing one because you said it was dark or black or whatever you said.
Well, she said it was a dark jacket, but here's my thinking on that, Bill. That shirt could have been mistaken for a jacket.
Except one thing. She said that he was zipping it up as he went out the front door.
Right.
So,
and it was a button up.
The shirt was a button up. She said he was zipping it up as he went out the front door. So he's leaving in a jacket. She told the reporters a short gray coat, regardless of what color it was. Okay. The $1 million question is, if you forget 10th and Patton, forget the police officer, forget the jacket found under the car. Let's talk just about the rooming house and Oswald on Jefferson Boulevard in front of the shoe store. Forget everything else. Why is he leaving the rooming house in a jacket and he's in front of the shoe store without one? I mean, why? If you don't believe Oswald killed Tippit, you have to reconcile that question. You have to do it honestly. You can't sit there and start arguing, well, maybe he was wearing a shirt when he left the rooming house and Earlene Roberts, half blind in one eye, mistook the shirt for a jacket. She said he was zipping it up. He went back there and got a coat, was zipping it up. Yeah, at least honestly deal, and I'm not challenging I don't mean you personally. I'm saying everyone. At least honestly deal with the fact that he left the rooming house in a jacket and he's seen by Johnny Brew without a jacket. That needs to be explained if you don't think Oswald killed Tippit.
Yeah, but again, I have another problem with that jacket. Oswald was not rich. He didn't have a lot. And he didn't have a shit ton of clothes, a shit ton of jackets. He had a certain amount of clothes. And he's reminds me of the type of guy who probably would have held on to things for years, you know what I mean? Until it just wore out so bad you can't wear it anymore. But if they could have tied this jacket that they found to Oswald better than what they did, because with the dry cleaning tags and the California thing and the sizing, it doesn't to me prove that jacket was Oswald's.
Okay, so your point is you're saying Oswald's frugal, which I will agree with.
Yes.
Okay, but so let me ask you this, and we'll get back to the jacket in just a second. If you agree with me that Oswald is frugal, okay, then the guy never takes a cab. He's always taking a bus. I don't know the prices back in 1963, but I imagine he could get on a bus and drop a dime in the slot, and he could go all the way across town on a dime, maybe 15 cents. Why, all of a sudden, on November 22nd, 1963, does he say, you know what, I'm going to spend 95 cents on a cab? He made $1.25 an hour, so he's going to spend almost an hour's wage, which in today's terms, what's minimum wage these days? $15 an hour. So someone who never takes a cab is all of a sudden going to spend 14 bucks on a cab. Why does Oswald, who never takes cabs, all of a sudden this particular day gets in a cab in front of the Greyhound station?
The bus isn't moving fast enough.
But he would have just caught another. I feel like he just would have caught another bus. That wasn't even the Beckley line. That was actually the Marsalis line that he got on. There's other buses. My point is, to me anyway, it's suspicious that all of a sudden he decides to spend money on a cab when he's never done that before. He's frugal. Now, regarding the jacket, so you realize that. So there's an FBI report, and Dale Myers and Todd Vaughn were in the National Archives sometime back in the 90s. And they came upon this report where there was fiber evidence found inside the sleeves of the jacket. Are you aware of this or not? Because I can explain it. So basically, okay, so the jacket that was found underneath the car behind the Texaco station, okay, there were microscopic fibers inside the sleeves of that jacket, okay?
Okay.
Now, when you compare fibers forensically, you do so based on three characteristics: color, shade, and twist. Those are the only three characteristics that you can use. There's no fourth, and there's not just two. There's three, no more, no less. They removed test fibers from the shirt Oswald was wearing when he was arrested. Okay, they compared the fibers found in the sleeves of the jacket with fibers removed from Oswald's shirt that he was wearing when he was arrested. These two separate batches of fibers had the exact same color. They had the exact same shade, and they had the exact same twist. Okay, they were a perfect match. Now, that doesn't prove that Oswald was wearing that jacket, but what it does prove is whoever was wearing the jacket was wearing a shirt just like Oswald's. Okay.
If you trust.
Incidentally, the rifle that was found up on the 6th floor, by the way, there was a tuft of fibers, microscopic fibers that were removed. That they were found inside a crevice between the metal butt plate and the wooden stock. Now, the wooden stock means the rifle. The
Did
metal
the
butt plate
FBI,
is that
did the
part.
FBI find this, or was the Dallas police?
That's a good question. I can't remember if it was Day or if it was the FBI. But there was a tuft of fibers that was found in that crevice between the wooden stock and the metal butt plate. Now, these fibers were also compared to the fibers removed from Oswald's arrest shirt, and they were the same color, the same shade, and the same twist. So it doesn't prove that Oswald fired that rifle, but it does prove that someone at one point was holding that rifle, and fibers transferred from his shirt to that little crevice right there on the other side of that metal. But the metal butt plate is that little metal part that goes up against the shoulder, the real thin strip.
Yeah.
That crevice right there. Then you got the wooden stock. Fibers were found in there, and they matched the arrest shirt. So, but that's just an oh by the way kind of thing. We don't have we're not talking. We're here to talk about Tippit, not necessarily the stuff on the sixth floor.
Yeah, because then we got to get into chain of custody and
Yeah.
when this
Now,
was done.
regarding chain of custody of the jacket, okay, a lot of
Yeah.
conspiracy advocates will like to say, well, there's no chain of custody for that jacket. First of all, there are initials on the jacket, by the way. There's several initials on the jacket. But anyway, here's how this would have happened, Rob. Had there been a trial in 1964, Bill Alexander, the assistant district attorney, or Henry Wade, they would have went to Captain Westbrook, who is the guy who pulled the jacket out from underneath the car, and they would have said, "What'd you do with the jacket?" "Oh, I gave it to Officer X." They then would have went to Officer X, and they would have said, "What did you do with the jacket after Westbrook gave it to you?" And he would have said, "Well, I turned it over to Officer Y." They then go to Officer Y, and they said, "What did you do with the jacket after Officer X gave it to you?" He would have said, "I gave it to Pete Barnes in the crime lab." Point being, had there been a trial, all of this chain of possession of the jacket would have been worked out. It wasn't worked out because the guy was killed 2 days later. There was never going to be a trial, so they didn't work out a chain of custody on the jacket that would have been worked out if there had been a trial. Let me put it to you this way: let's pretend Kennedy was never assassinated. Let's pretend that we're simply talking about a case of a cop who got killed back in 1963. Okay, and let's say, therefore, because it wasn't an assassin that killed the cop, Jack Ruby doesn't kill this guy, and this guy actually goes to trial in 1964. So let's say we're just reading about a killing of a police officer that happened in 1964 in Dallas, Texas.
Right.
We're going to read about the trial. One of the things we're going to read about in that trial is that jacket that was found that had fibers in it matching the shirt that he was arrested in. And there's going to be a chain of possession of that jacket because, as I just explained to you, Westbrook, X, Y, and Pete Barnes would have been on that chain of possession. It would have been squared away had there been a trial. When there's not going to be a trial, we're not worried about I'm saying the Dallas police, we're not worried about chain of possession of this jacket anymore because there's not going to be a trial. You understand what I'm saying?
I do.
Okay.
But I do have a question too about, the homicide clearance rate, Wade's conviction rate. They seem very, very high when compared to other departments and districts. And
Yes,
there's been
sadly,
a lot of allegations
yeah.
of falsifying evidence and planning things, and you know what I'm saying. So I
Yeah.
mean, not to say that it happened in this case, but you could see where there may have been some seeds being sown.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, Henry Wade leads the country, in cases that get overturned, due to DNA and things like that. In fact, I don't know the name, but I know I think they just like a month or two ago, one of the guys who got executed was actually exonerated by, and one of the guys who was he was prosecuted by Henry Wade, and
Yeah.
he got exonerated like 2 months ago, and he actually was put on the electric chair like in sometime back in the 50s or 60s or whenever it was. So the guy died for like either raping or murdering a woman, and it turns out now he didn't do it. We know for a fact he didn't do it, and that sucks. It's heartbreaking to read that. The family held a press conference, and things like that. But so yeah, Henry Wade had a bad track record for that, and I don't know what to say about that. I'm also not a Henry Wade apologist. But let me ask you this: regardless of anything that Wade may have done regarding any shenanigans that you may be speaking of, how does that change the fact that, for example, Ted Calloway swore up and down that the man he saw running down Pat with a gun was Lee Harvey Oswald? That's not related to Henry Wade
No,
whatsoever.
but I can say, eyewitnesses are very often mistaken when something like that happens. You see a guy run by you, how sure are you, but when you don't even understand what's going on at that time, that's the guy you saw. I mean, if you put yourself
But
in a
what's
real life situation like this, like if I'm out in my front yard mowing the yard, and I see some guy come around the corner and he's running by me. And I look over and just glance. How sure are you?
Yeah,
If you have
and
something,
so yeah, some witnesses, it can happen right in front of them, and they're not going to be good witnesses, and other witnesses will be great witnesses. It's on a case by case basis. But I'll tell you this: Ted Calloway swore up and down. I actually heard Dale Meyer's telephone interview with Ted Calloway, and Calloway swore up and down that Oswald is the guy I saw. I have no doubts. And also William Scoggins. Now Dale Myers in his book With Malice mentions an interview that he does with Jim Lavelle. Jim Lavelle told Dale Myers, now, yeah, this if we're sitting in a courtroom right now, this is hearsay. But for you and I doing this Lone Gunman podcast, Jim Lavelle told Dale Myers that William Scoggins told Jim Lavelle on the Saturday lineup when Oswald was raising hell, wasn't happy with the guys he was in the lineup with. He's in the T-shirt and all that. Scoggins said to Lavelle, well, he can bitch and moan all he wants to, but that's the guy I saw running from the scene. These witnesses were sure. They didn't have doubts. And it has nothing to do with Henry.
yeah. But I mean, Oswald was a pretty average looking dude. It wasn't like he had any outstanding features that would make him stand out to be different than your normal average looking early 20s white dude, with a normal haircut, no facial hair. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
Like it'd be
yeah,
one thing if he had giant ears or, a beard or something that
sure.
wasn't uncommon for that, you look
But it
back
goes
at
back to,
pictures and all these guys look the same. I mean, roughly,
but
unless
it
they're,
goes back to my point though that what you need to differentiate between the witnesses who attended the lineups, regardless of how you feel about the lineups. You need to differentiate between were they there to pick out the man who most resembled the man they saw, or are they there to pick out the man they saw? You got to, to me, they're there to pick out the man they saw, and they're allowed to say the guy I saw isn't among those four.
yeah. But like
I,
if Michael Payne at the time had been running around the corner and he's the one that shot Tippit and he's the one that went by Calloway, they
but you know
kind of
one difference,
resembled
Michael
each
Payne.
other back
But,
then at the same
but Michael Payne, Larry Kerfard, Igor Vaganov, Roscoe
yeah.
White, none of these guys were arrested in the Texas theater with the gun that's responsible for the shells that were found at the scene. So let's talk about the shells for a second. Is that
Yes.
okay?
Yes,
Okay.
let's get to the shells,
Okay.
the
So
revolver shells.
so I call them. Yeah. First of all, they're not automatic. You know how a lot of conspiracy advocates will like to argue that because Gerald Hill made a mistake, they like to argue that Tippit was killed with an automatic weapon and Oswald was arrested with a revolver. Well, here's the thing. Benavides, after the shooting, he's 15 feet away and he's looking over the door. He says the killer backed up onto the sidewalk, took off for the corner. He took about 5 steps, threw a shell casing down, took 5 more steps, threw another shell casing down, took off around the corner. Barbara Davis and Virginia Davis found the other 2 shell casings around the corner on Patton, up against the side of their house against the bushes. Now, that is over 115 feet away from the shooting scene. Barbara Davis and Virginia Davis found 2 shell casings over 115 feet from the patrol car. The patrol car is where shell casings would have been found if they were automatics, because an automatic automatically ejects the shell casing as each round is fired. Point
Right.
being, they weren't automatics. So having got that out of the way, Benavides found 2 of the shell casings, turned them over to Officer Joe Poe right there on the scene. Joe Poe, in turn, turned them over to Pete Barnes. Now, when you look at the Tippit crime scene photos, Pete Barnes is the guy that's dusting the patrol car, the door for prints on the passenger side. He's wearing the all black with the black hat. You can see his fingerprint kit sitting right there beside him at his feet. So Poe gets these 2 shell casings from Benavides, who turns them over. Poe then turns them over to Pete Barnes. About an hour later, when the authorities are still there, Barbara Davis finds a shell casing up against the side of the house, and she points it out to Captain Doty, who is the captain of the crime lab. He's Pete Barnes' boss. Doty comes over and picks up the shell casing. That's shell casing number 3. I call shells 1 and 2, the 2 that were found by Benavides, turned over to Poe. Shell number 3 was the one found by Barbara Davis, turned over to Captain Doty. And then shell casing number 4, later that day, after the authorities are gone, it's like 5:30 in the evening, Virginia Davis finds a shell casing. Barbara Davis calls the police and says, hey, my sister-in-law found another shell casing. So what they do is they send Captains Doherty, Detective Doherty and Detective Brown, not to be confused with Captain Doty, who picked up the 3rd shell casing. Doty and Doherty, I just want to distinguish 2 different guys. Detective Doherty and Detective Brown, they go to the Davis house and they collect that 4th shell casing. They also took the 2 girls at that moment. That's when they took them in for the lineup that night. Okay. So regarding chain of custody of the shell casings, now, first of all, before the chain of custody, these 4 shell casings were examined by 4 ballistic experts. Killian, Cunningham, Frazier, and Joseph Nickel, state of Illinois. Killian, Cunningham, and Frazier were FBI. Joseph Nickel was state of Illinois, Firearms Identification Unit. All 4 of these experts examined these 4 shell casings independent of each other. They did it on their own, independent of each other. They all 4 determined that all 4 shell casings were fired from Oswald's revolver, the revolver that Oswald had on him when he was arrested, to the exclusion of any other weapon in the world. Okay, so point being, the weapon that Oswald had on him when he was arrested was responsible for the shell casings that were found at the scene. Now, a lot of conspiracy advocates, they want to challenge the chain of custody of these shell casings. They say, well,
They're doing it in the comment section as we speak.
Okay, I can't see, so you'll have to read them if you want to. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
They want to say, well, Joe Poe couldn't find it. He said he marked the shells, but he couldn't find them on the shells. So that proves that the shells were switched out for other shells to frame Oswald. But here's the thing. How do I say this in a nice way? If you're going to criticize Poe, at least go read his damn testimony. Because in his testimony, he says, I can't be sure I marked them. He can't be sure that he even marked the shells. All right. Now, you got to picture this. You're at the scene. They haven't even caught the cop killer yet. A guy brings over 2 shell casings and a Winston cigarette wrapper. Are you going to pull them out and start scratching? You're just going to give them to Barnes, which is what he did. He didn't mark them. Jim Lavelle even said he didn't mark the shells.
Yeah, I wouldn't think he'd mark them at the scene.
Yeah, but that's the thing. But that's where they attack Poe. That's where they attack him. He said he marked the shells, but they don't read his testimony where he says, I can't be sure if I even marked them or not. Okay. And then shell casing number 3, this is the one found by Barbara Davis that Captain Doty came over and picked up. Doty did put a marking in the shell. Shell casing number 4, Detective Doherty and Detective Brown, they went out that night and picked up the 4th shell casing and took the 2 girls for the lineup. The FBI visited both of these men in the summer of '64, and they presented them with all 4 shell casings. Both Doherty and Captain Doty were able to find their marking in the shell casing they handled that day. Okay, so had there been a trial, this would have been done in November or December. Had there been a trial, but there wasn't a trial. So now that the FBI is doing all this for the Warren Commission, they had all year to do it. Had there been a trial, a chain of custody would have been put in place because Captain Doty, who picked up shell casing number 3, the one that Barbara Davis found, authenticates that shell casing as the one he handled that day. That one shell casing is all you need to fry Oswald because that one shell casing linked to the exclusion of any other weapon in the world to Oswald's gun. So
somebody said the 2 Davis sisters were unable to identify the shell casings later.
That is true. So the FBI went to the Davis girls as well. But let me ask you this question. Yeah. Barbara Davis and Virginia Davis aren't placing a marking in a shell. So how can they tell that shell from any other shell, any other 38 special? How could they possibly know? They all look it's a ludicrous question. A shell casing looks like any other shell casing as long as it's 38 special, which is what these were. How are they supposed to know when they're presented with a shell casing that they didn't mark? How are they supposed to know if that was it? It's not even a bit suspicious that, yes, they could not identify the shell casing, but how is that? What does that mean? That means nothing.
So only the hammer marks could be examined on the casings, or
the hammer mark on the primer, but also as far as the shell casings, yes. I was getting ready to talk about the bullets. Yeah.
Yeah, but the casings, it's the hammer marks. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah, because weren't the bullets too small for the 38 special? So
yeah, that's the problem. So the gun was for 38s, but a 38 special was a better type of ammunition, and it was a better quality ammunition. But the 38 special was smaller in diameter, not necessarily length, but smaller in diameter, so it wasn't as round as the 38 special, as the regular 38. So the problem was the revolver was fitted for 38. Oswald used the 38 specials. So as he fired off each bullet, it travels through the barrel because it's smaller. It's making it's having an inconsistent track down the barrel from one bullet to the next. In order to ballistically link bullets to a weapon, they need to be consistent with each other for testing and comparison purposes. But because these 38 specials were small, they didn't have the same consistent path down the barrel, so you really couldn't test and link those bullets to that gun. However, Joseph Nickel, the one from Illinois, was able to link, according to him, one of the 4 bullets to that revolver, even though the other 3, Frazier, Killian, and Cunningham of the FBI, couldn't link any of the bullets to the revolver. So
Yeah.
you have to take Nichols' finding with a grain of salt, but maybe he was just better at his job than they were. I don't know what to say about it, but he, according to him, was able to link one of the four bullets to Oswald's revolver.
Hmm.
But yeah, the reason why the ballistic testing on the bullets was tough was because the bullets made an inconsistent path down the barrel, different scratches, and because they were smaller than the barrel, they were too small for the barrel. If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
It was two different kinds of ammo, right? You had
Yeah,
Winchester.
so yeah,
Remington.
so the bullets removed from Tippett's body, you had three Winchester Western bullets and one Remington Peters bullet. But the four shell casings that were found at the scene were two Remington Peters and two Winchesters. So you had two and two of the shell casings, but three and one of the bullets. So there's obviously a mismatch right there.
Yeah.
So J.C. Day was the first one that kind of was putting this together, and he basically concluded that what if a fifth shot was fired that missed? What if Oswald fired five shots instead of four? Ted Calloway, who I consider the best Tippit witness, said he heard five shots. I'm not saying that makes it a fact. I'm just telling you, Ted Calloway, who I consider the best witness, said he heard five shots. So what if Oswald fired five shots and one missed? We had three Winchester Western bullets removed from Tippett's body and one Remington Peters. What if the missing bullet was never recovered, was a Remington Peters? Now you have three Winchester Western bullets and two Remington Peters, okay? 3 and 2. Now, what if a shell casing was never found as well? Because we had two Winchester Western shell casings and two Remington Peters shell casings. What if the missing shell casing was a Winchester Western? If that's the case, and it's speculation, you now have three Winchester Western shell casings and two Remington Peters shell casings. So you now have three Winchester Western bullets, three Winchester Western casings, two Remington Peters bullets, two Remington Peters casings. And that easily ties that up. But yes, you do need a fifth shot to take place in order for that to be the case.
Well, wasn't Oswald, when he was arrested, didn't he have some bullets in his pocket?
Yeah, so Oswald had 6 bullets in the weapon, 3 Remington Peters bullets and 3 Winchester bullets in his front left pants pocket. Now, this was removed like 2 hours after he's already in custody. He had 5 bullets in his front left pants pocket also. Yeah, he had 11 bullets on him if you want to count the 5 in his pocket and the 6 in the gun. Which, by the way, so Tippett's killed by both Remington and Winchester. Oswald happens to have Remington and Winchester on him when he's arrested. Is that a coincidence or,
I was planning on him, Bill. You know that.
Yeah. As far as there being 2 shooters at the scene, for example, some people like to say that Tippit was shot by 2 different men because of these mixed match bullets. So you had Jimmy Burton, Bill Smith, you had Benavides is 3, Helen Markham is 4, William Scoggins is 5. You had 5 people that were watching this whole thing go down before the shooting. They saw the guy talking to the cop, right? All 5. Now, these are the only 5 people that are watching this go down. Barbara Davis and Virginia Davis were in the house at the time. Ginyard and Calloway around the corner. But these 5 people are watching this go down. Jimmy Burt, Bill Smith, Benavides, Helen Markham, William Scoggins. All 5 of them described Tippit encountering only one man. Tippit did not encounter 2 men. This Mark Lane, Aquila Clemens stuff is nonsense. If you believe that there were 2 shooters, then you got to dismiss these 5 witnesses who watched it happen and said it was just one guy.
Yeah. And I think I was listening to Mark Lane, Helen Markham telephone call, and he was really trying to get her to say that the guy you saw was heavy with bushy hair, right?
Right.
Type of thing.
Look,
She wasn't trying to commit to the heavy part.
Yeah. But Mark Lane, he was acting like a defense attorney, and that's what defense attorneys do. They try to raise reasonable doubt. So,
Yeah.
So I wanted to say there's something else that I wanted to discuss here, and that's the time of the shooting being at 1:15. Because a lot of people, remember we talked about this earlier. A lot of people like to argue the shooting occurred at 1:06 or 1:07, whereas I believe it was at 1:15 to 1:16. Okay, let me tell you a couple things about that. So, Mary Wright, she was interviewed by George and Patricia Nash in 1964, and she told them that when she heard the shots.
Who's Barbara Wright?
Mary Wright. Okay, so
Mary.
so Mary Wright and Frank Wright was a married couple who lived in the duplex that was shared by the front yard that Jimmy Burt and Bill Smith were in.
Okay.
They were a block east at 10th and Denver, and they were in the house, Mary Wright and Frank Wright. They heard the shots. They're not witnesses to the shooting, but they heard the shots. Frank Wright went out in the street, looked down the street, but Mary Wright called the police. So she called the police. She used the word immediately when you watch her, when you listen to her, or you read the transcripts of her interview with Georgia Patricia Nash. Okay. So Mary Wright calls the police immediately. Let's go down to Barbara Davis. So the Davis girls, they're in the house, they hear the shots, they go to the front door. After the killer goes around the corner, Barbara Davis goes back inside and calls the police. So Barbara Davis is calling the police probably 30, 35, 45 seconds after the shooting. Okay. Maybe a minute at the most. She's on the phone with the police. L.J. Lewis was at the Johnny Reynolds Motor Company a block south of the shooting scene. Now, that's the one where you had Harold Russell, Pat Patterson, Warren Reynolds, and L.J. Lewis. L.J. Lewis, so Warren Reynolds and Pat Patterson decide they're going to follow the cop killer along the street, on the other side of the street, so they follow him for a block at Warren Reynolds' suggestion. Harold Russell, he leaves the car lot, goes up to the scene of the shooting to see what happened. The fourth guy, L.J. Lewis, goes back inside and calls the police. So L.J. Lewis calls the police probably 2 minutes after the shooting, because he calls the police after the killer turns on Jefferson. Now, let's go to T.F. Boley. He gets on the squad car radio at 117 to report the shooting to the police dispatcher. Now, when you listen to the audio of that report by T.F. Boley, or you read the transcripts, as soon as T.F. Boley says, "Hello, police operator, there's been a shooting out here," you hear the dispatcher say, "Where's it at?" And Boley basically says, "On 10th Street, between Marsalis and Beckley." He didn't know exactly where he was, but he was right. It was on 10th, and it was between Marsalis and Beckley. He said, "It's a police officer. Somebody shot him." What's the first thing you hear the dispatcher, Murray Jackson, what's the first thing you hear him do? He calls out for 78. It's something he wouldn't have done if he already knew Tippit was killed. So Jackson, at this moment, is the first time he realizes that J.D. Tippit has been shot, because he calls out for 78. Once he learns that it's on 10th Street and Oak Cliff between Marsalis and Beckley, first thing he does is calls out for 78. And if you listen to the tapes, you hear it. And then he calls out for 78 a second time. Yeah. And then you can hear Boley say, "Hello, did you get that? Did you get that?" And then Jackson calls out for 78 a third time. My point is this. At 117, Murray Jackson, because that's when Boley made his radio report, if you trust the police tapes, which I do. But at 117, Murray Jackson is being made aware for the first time that Tippit has been shot. We know that Mary Wright, for example, called the police immediately after hearing the shots. Yet, Murray Jackson is not aware of Mary Wright's phone call yet. How long do you think it would take in 1963 to get through to the police to report the shooting? So let's say, back then there was no 911. So Mary Wright goes to her phone. She dials 0 for operator. Operator gets on. She says, "I need the police department." She gets transferred to the Dallas Police Department. Dallas Police answers the phone. She says, "There's been a shooting I want to report out here in Oak Cliff." And then she gives them the location of the shooting. How long do you think that whole thing would have taken between the time she picks up the phone to make the call and the time she tells someone at Dallas Police that the shooting occurred? What's your estimate of, back in 1963, how long do you think that would have taken?
Maybe a minute tops.
Fair enough. I agree. Minute tops. If the shooting occurred at 106 or 107, then Mary Wright is making that phone call at 107 or 108. The dispatcher, Murray Jackson, should have known of Tippit's shooting by 109, because what happens is the person at the police department, it gets transferred, they put the information on a note, it goes on a dictabelt down to the dispatcher. So Jackson would have known by 109, being generous, 109, 110, Jackson would have known about the shooting. Yet he doesn't know until 117 when T.F. Boley tells him.
Well, something about T.F. Boley. Didn't he himself put the shooting earlier than that?
Yeah, so what Boley does when he gets out of his car, he said he looked at his watch and noted that the time was 1:10. And then he goes over to the body, looks down at the body. He notices that there's nothing he can do for him. He goes to the radio, Benavides, he gets Benavides out of the way, and he gets on it and reports it. So how long do you think? Now, Boley tells us what he did. He pulled up on the scene. He walked over to the patrol car. Notice there's nothing he can do for the officer. He's got a bullet wound in his temple. And at the temple, the bullet wound in the temple is facing the sky. Everybody can see it. He goes over, moves Benavides away from the radio, and he gets on the radio and reports the shooting. So Boley's reporting the shooting within a couple of minutes after arriving, I would say, because Boley, he tells us what he did. And nowhere does he say, "I stood around for 5 or 6 minutes or 8 minutes before I finally made the report on the radio." He tells us what he did. "I got out of the car. My watch said 1:10. I walked over to the body. Then I got on the radio and reported it." He's reporting the shooting within a minute or two of arriving. Okay. Point being, he's reporting the shooting at 1:17, so he arrives like at 1:15. unless you believe he stood there for 7 minutes before he gets on the radio. But he tells us what he did. He doesn't stand around for 7 minutes. Therefore, you either have to accept the police tapes, which what I just now said about Mary Wright calling the police immediately. You have to accept that the police tapes are inaccurate, or you have to accept that Bowley's watch, a 1960s era wind-up wristwatch, could be inaccurate. One or the other. They're not both accurate. One's wrong.
Right. So according to
it's up to each of us to choose whether we want to believe the verbal timestamps given by the dispatcher between 12:30 and 1:50. All throughout, he's verbally timestamping. It'll be like unit 49. I need you to go here, 12:58. So you're either going to believe those are accurate, or you're going to believe Bowley's watch was accurate, because one contradicts the other. I know what I'm going to believe, and it's up to each of us to choose which we would prefer to believe.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Man, there's so many aspects to this thing. It's insane.
Yeah, but the one thing I really wanted to point out to you, though, was I took offense to Matt Douthit saying that I stopped when we did our drive from the Greyhound station to Beckley and Neely, that I insisted on stopping that I paused the clock at stop signs. I didn't do that. In fact, I don't remember coming to stop signs. Maybe we did, but I didn't stop it. I stopped it at 3 red lights, and that was it, because I was trying to see the earliest we could have got to 10th and Patton. And when you're just trying to see the earliest, you got to pause it at the red lights. But I didn't pause it at stop signs, so I don't know where Matt's getting that. And also regarding Matt Douthit, he likes to rely on witnesses that come out in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, whereas I'm talking about the real witnesses, the witnesses we hear from, either from FBI reports or the police in November, December, December 63, January 64. I don't want to rely on witnesses. That's why, again, if I wanted to, I could rely on Jack Tatum. But we don't hear from Tatum until the House Select Committee assassinations investigation in 1976, I think, was when they first went out and interviewed Jack Tatum. And he's a great witness to use for the killer being Oswald. But I never mention him, because my point is, I don't like to rely on witnesses after the fact, which is Tatum, which are the witnesses Douthit won't. And also, I heard through the grapevine when I was in New Orleans this past week, one of my buddies I was down there with was in Dallas before going to New Orleans, and he hung out with Matt Douthit at 10th and Patton. And he brought up, his name is Mark Wright. He brought up, I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning his name, he brought up the Davis sisters and how they identified Oswald. And according to Mark, and I hope I don't misquote Matt, but according to Mark, Matt Douthit said, well, they were asleep with the kids, and by the time they got to the front door, they were still groggy. And come on. So that is Matt not liking what a witness says, and therefore doing anything he can to dismiss it. Because the Davis girls, there's nothing to suggest they were groggy and couldn't see straight when they were standing at the front door watching the cop killer run across their front yard. So,
yeah, much like with anything else, I don't think just because they didn't come out at the time, you can dismiss a witness just out of hand.
Well, there's a thing called same-day evidence, so witness testimony, I like to stick with that whole same-day evidence idea.
Yeah, but it should be investigated, taken into consideration, run through the hoops, and see if it can be corroborated, see if it helps this or helps that. You never know.
It's like Butch Burroughs. Let's talk about Butch Burroughs at the Texas Theater. And I know you've heard that, Butch Burroughs, he appears on The Men Who Killed Kennedy in 1988. Oswald came in about 106, 107, and
yeah.
Obviously if Oswald's in the theater at 106, 107, he's not shooting Tippit at 115, right? Correct. So, but the people who quote that, they've seen The Men Who Killed Kennedy, but they haven't read Butch Burroughs' Warren Commission testimony. Because Butch Burroughs' Warren Commission testimony, they asked him if he saw the guy come in. He says no. And then the conspiracy advocates will say, well, they didn't ask him the right question. That's bullshit too, because during the search for and this is in Burroughs' testimony, all you got to do is go read it. During the search for the killer inside the theater, one of the police officers came up to Burroughs and said, have you seen him? They came up to Burroughs and said, have you seen him? He said no. If he would have sold the guy popcorn 10 minutes early, he would have said it at that point. Burroughs literally testifies to the Warren Commission in 1964. I didn't see him come in the theater. And he also talks about a cop coming up and asking him, have you seen the guy? While they were still searching for him, have you seen the guy? And Burroughs says no. Yet they want to forget about all that, or they don't even know about it. And they want to talk about the fact that Burroughs says that Oswald was in the theater at 106, 107. He sold him popcorn. Burroughs doesn't even say any of that until he's interviewed in 1987 by Jim Mars when he appeared in Crossfire, and then 88 for The Men Who Killed Kennedy. Why would you believe something Burroughs says 25 years later and dismiss what he testified to the Warren Commission?
I don't know. Same reason you can't believe George Applin 20 years or
Yeah, yeah.
15 years later when he says Jack Ruby's in the Texas Theater behind him.
You are exactly right. Yep, absolutely.
And that,
100%.
since you mentioned that, I don't remember anybody in the theater at the time saying that Oswald had popcorn or there was popcorn flying everywhere. When he got up.
Right. Yep, absolutely. And by the way, Oswald's let out not wearing a jacket. So what happened to that jacket that he was zipping up as he went out the front door of the rooming house?
Well, that was the guy in the balcony that was wearing the jacket.
Yeah, the two Oswalds.
Yeah.
Because God forbid the police simply mess up and say that he was whoever typed up the arrest report back at headquarters for some reason believed it was in the balcony instead of the main lot, the main seating area. Mistakes happen. I mean, hell, didn't somebody report that a Secret Service agent was killed in Dealey Plaza and they saw the blood on the sidewalk? Because there's a red pot that spilled. I mean, mistakes happen early on. It's not to be you got to use your logic and your common sense and evaluate: is this just a mistake or is this really happening this way?
And somebody's seen coming out the back of the Texas Theater being arrested.
Yeah. Which, by the way, just so you know, Johnny Brewer is behind the screen.
Right.
He hears commotion on that back door. He opens the door to let the police in. The first thing they do, and go read Johnny Brewer's testimony, the first thing they do is they grabbed him, pulled him out into the alley and frisked him. He's like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm the one who called you. I can point the guy out to you. Mm-hmm. Oh, you can point him out to us. So they go back inside and he points Oswald out. So just so you know, Johnny Brewer was accosted out in the alley behind the theater, but he was not taken in the car and driven off, obviously. But someone could see that and mistake that for an arrest.
And mistake Brewer for Oswald because all them dudes look the same back then. Right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So do you have any other questions? I feel like I've covered everything I want to cover.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if Matt has any hair left in his head after this interview.
Yeah, let's see here. So I got a couple things written down I wanted to make sure I got to, but I feel like I did. Oh, yeah, we were going to talk about Doris Holan.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you asked. Do you want? We have time, or do you want to get into that or not?
Good, up to the fact that where she was living at the time, she couldn't really see what she said she saw.
Yeah,
because they used to live across the street from where Tippit was shot. I guess where Benavides was pulled over.
Right. Correct.
By that time, she had moved over on Patton.
Yeah. Do we have time to get into this? It's going to take about 5 minutes. Do we have time? Or
yeah, we're good.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the story, for those who don't know, Doris Holan is a supposed witness who said that she saw a second police car at the Tippit scene. Mike Brownlow, who is a Dallas area researcher, he's the fellow you can see in YouTube videos hanging out in Dealey Plaza.
Yeah,
big burly black guy. Yep. Big deep voice, ladies and gentlemen,
Mm-hmm.
He comes up with this story, in my opinion, but he says he interviewed Doris Holan at a nursing home before she passed away. And she told him the story of seeing, she lived on 10th Street, right across from the shooting scene. And she sees two police, she heard the shots, looked outside and saw two police cars, not just one, basically alluding to the fact that Tippit was killed by a police officer, not Oswald. Okay.
Right.
Now, when Mike Brownlow told this story, first of all, it's questionable that he even interviewed Doris Holan, in my opinion, because Brownlow's a known liar, and I can prove that 10 times over. But anyway, Brownlow, he put this thing out in the early 2000s called Shattered Friday, and he interviews Tippit witnesses or Dealey Plaza witnesses, and he video records every single one of them. Yet he doesn't record Doris Holan for some reason, right? There's no video of this, but he says that she told him when he visited her at the nursing home that she lived on 10th Street, right across from the shooting scene. She heard the shots, goes to the front window, looks out, and sees two police cars. So Brownlow, when he told the story, believed mistakenly that Doris Holan lived on 10th Street, right across from the shooting scene. Dale Myers had the city directory proved, and you can read his blogspot post. He's got a great blogspot. He's got a great post about this. That Doris Holan on November 22nd, 1963, actually lived around the corner on Patton, halfway down where the alley is, literally halfway down. The Davis house that sat on the corner was a big 2-story house. Doris Holan lived in a second-story apartment. There's a hardware store on the bottom floor. She lived on the second floor. She had no line of sight from her apartment to the Tippit shooting scene, zero line of sight.
Right.
Therefore, she couldn't have seen what Brownlow says that she told him she saw. Point being, my opinion is that Brownlow's making the whole thing up because I know Brownlow's made up other stories. And why didn't he video record her saying this? Because he recorded all of his other stuff when he did this Shattered Friday documentary that he did.
Maybe it's in Shattered Friday 2.
Yeah, and Ladholand, her son,
Friday.
he tells the story, and he talks about going around the corner, describes the residence on Patton halfway down the block, and he put his books on the steps. When he came upon the Tippit scene, he went around the corner and put his books on the steps and then went back up. So Ladholand even acknowledges on November 22nd, 1963, we lived on Patton halfway down between 10th and Jefferson. So Doris Holand simply didn't have a line of sight, but Mike Brownlow thought she lived on 10th Street when he told his story. Let me just put that.
She had a line of sight to the alley behind the house.
She had a line of sight to the alley, but she said the driveway. According to Brownlow, he says driveway, not alley.
Right. Yeah, because there is no driveway in between those houses.
Correct. There was a driveway between the second and third house where Tippit was stopped, but it didn't have access to the alley anyway. But there was a little drive that went between the two houses. And nevertheless, now again, according to Brownlow, Doris Holand says driveway. We're not talking about the alley. Doris Holand could have seen the alley. Obviously, she lived right there by the alley. But Sam Ginyard was a porter at the Deutsch Brothers Motor, or I'm sorry, the Deutsch Motor Company or the Harris Brothers. It's called both names. It was the middle of changing ownership is why. Anyway, Sam Ginyard was a porter. He's back there washing the cars in the back of the lot. He's right up against the car lot backed up against the alley. Sam Ginyard, read his testimony. Doesn't make mention of a police car in that alley. He was right there. He hears the shots. He looks up the street. He actually saw Oswald running between two of the houses on the sidewalk, making his way to the corner. Ginyard saw him, for like a split second go, on the sidewalk. He could see him as he's looking up the path between two of the houses. And then Ginyard goes over to the sidewalk along with Calloway, look for a little further down. And both of these men are on the sidewalk looking up the street as Oswald's coming down. Ginyard makes no mention, and he's right there at the alley, makes no mention of a police car in the alley. So now, interestingly enough, Brownlow also adds sometime in the 1980s or 90s, all of a sudden he supposedly interviewed Ginyard at some point earlier, and Ginyard told him that there was a police car in the alley. But Ginyard never says that in his Warren Commission testimony. So why would you believe any of that stuff?
And he was probably dead by this point too, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Everything that Brownlow comes out with, the witness has already died. So
that's par for the course with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. So the bottom line for me, to sum all this up, and I'll answer questions if we want, or we can wrap it up. That's up to you. I got time, but that's up to you. But the bottom line for me is that the eyewitnesses either said they weren't sure or they positively identified Oswald. The shell casings were a match to the exclusion of any other weapon in the world to Oswald's revolver. One of the bullets was a match to Oswald's revolver, at least by one of the experts. And Oswald was wearing the jacket that was ditched, or at least he was wearing a jacket that he ditched somewhere between the rooming house and the shoe store on Jefferson. And that's the $1 million question right there. That's something that a conspiracy theorist will never adequately try to answer. Why did he get rid of the jacket between the rooming house and the shoe store on Jefferson? Forget 10th and Patton, forget Tippit, forget the jacket found under the car behind the Texaco. He ditched the jacket somewhere along the way. Why would he do that? The obvious answer is because he's trying to change his appearance because he just shot a cop. So if you're going to believe that Oswald, let me put it this way, if you're going to believe that someone besides Oswald murdered J.D. Tippit, then you're going to do so without the benefit of the evidence. And why would you do that? Because the evidence which exists points only to Oswald. There's no evidence which exists that points anywhere other than Oswald.
Is there a world that exists where Oswald didn't shoot Kennedy but did shoot Tippit?
Sure. And I always say that, regarding what happened in Dealey Plaza, you can't say with 100% certainty that Oswald shot at Kennedy because there's no witnesses to him up in there. There's no witnesses to Oswald up there in that window firing the shots at Kennedy. And, we can discuss Howard Brennan, but that's a whole other conversation. Yeah. So you can't say with 100% certainty that Oswald shot Kennedy. However, there were two fragments, Warren Commission Exhibits 567 and 569, if anybody wants to look them up. These are the two larger fragments that were found in the limo. These fragments were large enough for ballistic testing. These two fragments were linked to the exclusion of any other weapon in the world to Oswald's rifle found up on the 6th floor. So the rifle was responsible for firing the headshot because the fragments were from the headshot. Whether Oswald's the one that fired the rifle or not, but that rifle is responsible for the headshot, according to the ballistic testing. Warren Commission Exhibits 567 and 569. So there is a world where Oswald didn't shoot at Kennedy, was being framed, and perhaps thought that, Tippit was there to kill him, so he kills Tippit. But I'm here to talk about the Tippit killing, and
Yeah.
I'm here to basically to try to my best to prove to everybody that regardless of what happened in Dealey Plaza, Oswald murdered J.D. Tippit. And like I said earlier, I'm an expert on the Tippit case, and if you want to check this book out. Any of you can be an expert.
How much is that sucker on Amazon?
I don't know. I bought it personally from Dale for $50. So we were in Dallas back in 2019. Bought it right out of his truck.
With Malice. I'm just curious. Some of these books these days. Oh, that's not well. That's a Kindle version. I was going to say that's not bad. But if you'd like it in hardcover, well, you better hang on to that one.
Oh yeah, yeah.
$387.
Really?
Right
now, a lot of conspiracy advocates in all these Facebook groups and these internet forums, they'll rip Dale Myers, saying he's not being honest, not reaching an honest conclusion on With Malice. And you know what? They haven't even read With Malice. And I can tell by talking to them for 3 minutes because I'll ask them questions. And if they've read the book and they say they have, they can answer my questions real simply. But they don't because they haven't read the book. And the same thing with the Warren Report. Why are you going to criticize the Warren Report if you at least go read it first, and then we can discuss? But I'm not going to listen to somebody who's never read the report and they want to start criticizing it because they've read conspiracy stuff from some conspiracy author's website. And go to the horse's mouth, read the Warren Report first. And if you don't believe it, that's fine. Then we can discuss. But at least read the Warren Report first. At least go read With Malice if you're going to discuss the Tippit case.
Yeah, and the Tippit case alone is a lot. I put it up there with the medical evidence, Mexico City. If you're going to go into it, just know going into it that there's a lot to go through and a lot. It's a task. And I for one put it off for a long time. Like I said, I haven't read With Malice, but I haven't read Into the Nightmare either. You know what I mean?
By the way, Joseph McBride gets a lot of his information from Dale Myers With Malice, just so you know.
Yeah, I've never had either guy on the show. As far as Tippit authors go.
Yeah,
but
can I tell you something about Joseph McBride? I didn't mean to interrupt you, but let me tell you something real quick. I once watched Joseph McBride some interview on YouTube about a year and a half ago. I'm not lying about this. I wouldn't lie just to try to make a guy look foolish. But he literally said that Tippit was behind the picket fence shooting at Kennedy with a service revolver. Now, obviously, Joseph McBride has never fired guns before because that's a good 75 to 90 feet. I'm just guessing. Never measured it. You don't shoot a revolver from 75 to 90 feet away. You're going to miss every single time. You want a long-barreled rifle. That's where you get the accuracy from. So
or a James Fireball.
Yeah. At least that Remington Fireball, according to Files, was at least a half of a barrel.
Right.
We're talking about a service revolver. You don't shoot from. You don't try to hit something from 90 feet with a service revolver. But Joseph McBride actually said that. So, and if you still want to go read Into the Nightmare after hearing that, then that's up to you.
Yeah, no, I haven't. Like I said, I haven't read either one. I've purposely tried to stay out of things until I'm ready mentally to get into them.
Right.
And
that's fair. That's fair.
I had met Matt when I came to Dallas back in 2019, and we hung out, and I went to his first little get together there at 10th and Patton, and I've been wanting to get him on the show for a while, and finally did. And I don't like this show to be an echo chamber. I like new ideas, and when you ask to come on, I got no problem with that.
Yeah.
I just don't want to turn into some bashing session.
And I'm not trying to be honest with you. I'd have been perfectly fine if we didn't even mention Matt, but you brought him up early, so that's why I've said what I said.
Both you guys are very passionate about this thing, and you can it's not like there's ill feelings or ill will. Or an ill intention of trying to.
I just don't want to be misquoted, and he's doing that to me big time. And I'm just trying to.
You have every right to come on here and defend yourself. Right. When I had Matt on, he did mention your name, so I wanted to give you a chance to come on here and get it all out and explain your side of things because it's important for people to hear, especially on this show. This is a conspiracy-based show, but every once in a while we'll have some lone nutters on here to. Just to add a different voice, to add a different opinion and see where you're coming from. Because I can tell just from talking to you for the past couple hours, you're very passionate about this. It interests you. And I'm sure if we hung out in New Orleans or Dallas, we'd have a great time, even though we don't see eye to eye.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
It's not like we have to,
You would be. We go down to Dallas. We go down to Dallas about every year and a half, and you'd be. There's always 5 to 12 of us, anywhere in between, and you'd be completely welcome to hang out with us. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't want to. I don't want to. I don't, as a matter of fact, if we had a conspiracy advocate with us, it would spark our conversation a little bit more instead of
Yeah.
all of
In
us
a
lone nutters
three-way.
just patting each other on the back.
I tell you, I had Gerald Patrick Hemming's son, Felipe Hemming,
Okay.
on here, and Edwin Kaiser's son, Scott Kaiser, on the show. This was a long time ago,
Uh-huh.
like 300 episodes ago, and it was the first show I ever did live on YouTube, and it was a shit show. I mean, these two guys were going at each other, man.
Really.
Oh yeah, it was horrible. I mean, it's still up. I think it's episode 78. I think
Okay.
if anybody wants to go back and watch it, I'm just sitting here like,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know, they were just going at each other, and I was like, holy
Yeah.
shit,
Yeah.
what did I
So
do?
Matt and I have done 3 debates online on the Tippit case.
Yeah,
And every now and then we'll be a little bit raise our voices kind of thing, but for the most part, especially the third one. So it's the third one that we did was about a year and a half ago, and it was on Matt's his JFK debates project that he has on his YouTube channel,
mm-hmm.
and we were very civil through the whole thing. But I completely, in my opinion, he had 10 points he was trying to prove, and like 6 of them I agreed with because they didn't because what he was saying was right, but it didn't suggest Oswald's guilt or innocence either way. The other 4, I actually got him to change his how he worded his points because I proved all 4 of them to be wrong. And what this was he was doing the Lancer conference in November of 24, and he and I did his little show about a week before his Lancer conference presentation, and he was doing it on the 10 points he was going to bring up at the Lancer conference. So to this day, I don't know if he ever changed them for his conference, but he admitted in the interview that he and I did for his YouTube channel that he was going to change the wording on like 4 of those points. Don't know if he ever did or not though.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
But point is, we were civil. We were civil the whole time.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, you almost have to, or the point gets lost in the noise. You know, people just tune out.
Yeah, true, right.
You know, I think we had a great conversation, and I want to thank you for coming on the show. You did a great job defending your viewpoint of all this and putting forth the other side of information. And, you know, people take it for what it's worth. I mean, it's not all wrong. I mean, and do your own research, you know.
Right.
Go do the time trials. You
Right.
walk the time yourself.
Absolutely. And I also want to point out one more thing. Matt Douthit has, to the best of my knowledge, he criticizes other people's time trials, yet he's never walked from the rooming house to 10th and Patton. How could you not do that? If he's done it, he's never recorded it or talked about it. And every time I ask him, he skips over the question like he's never seen it. So how can you criticize others for their time trials when you haven't even done the walk yourself from the rooming house to 10th and Patton? So that could be a question you could ask him if you have him on again. Or ask him if
he may have, and I might be talking out of turn. He may have said something about we don't know exactly which route it was.
Yeah, but that's true. There's no way to know for sure.
Yeah, but I just wanted to thank Jerry Dealey for becoming a member and the super chat, and Zendar for the super chat earlier as well. And again, thank you, Bill Brown, for showing up. And
I appreciate it, Rob. Thanks for having me on. Yep, I appreciate it. I had fun.
You're welcome to come back anytime, man.
Sounds good.
At this point, Bill, we call in our buddy Dean Andrews to get us out of here. Right?
All right.
So just hang out, and Dean Andrews will sing us and dance us out of here, and then that'll be the show.
Pipe the bimbo in red.
That's right. Dino, get your fat ass in here, buddy. Where are you at?
For the record, but, he said, come to Bourbon Street and I'll show you what I think of the case. The greatest lies are told in the name of truth. The greatest crimes are committed in the name of justice. The quotation is Jim Garrison's. It could be used for him or against him in this strange case. Good night.
Hey, look, it's still in the booth. Bill, thanks again. And folks, we'll see you next week, Wednesday, members only. Be there. Peace.